Don't walk past me in that dress again." Emma Carter froze. The ballroom noise dissolved. Every crystal chandelier above her seemed to dim. The man who had just spoken wasn't looking at her like she was beautiful. He was looking at her like she was already in danger, and he was the only one who knew it. She laughed because that's what women do when powerful men say things they don't understand. She called it flirting. She called it arrogance. She walked away. She had no idea that in 30 seconds, 3 men across the room had already taken her photograph. If this story already has you holding your breath, you're in the right place. Subscribe to our channel right now, hit that notification bell, and follow every part of this story until the very end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Emma Carter had a rule she'd lived by for 34 years: stay invisible. Not because she was ashamed of herself. Not because she lacked confidence in the quiet private corners of her own life. But because Emma had learned through years of watching other people make spectacular mistakes that the most dangerous thing a woman in her position could do was make herself memorable to the wrong kind of man. She worked 2 jobs. She paid her rent on time. She called her mother every Sunday, and she never not once spent money she didn't have. She was the kind of woman who sat in the back row at every gathering, who volunteered to take the photos at birthday parties so she'd never have to be in them, who ordered the same thing at restaurants because familiarity felt like safety. Her best friend Dana called it hiding. Emma called it survival. "You are going to that gala." Dana had told her 3 weeks earlier, standing in Emma's apartment, with the kind of certainty that made arguing feel pointless. "One night, one dress, that's all I'm asking." "I don't belong at a charity gala, Dana. You work 60 hours a week, and you've never once done something just for yourself." Dana had held up the garment bag like it was evidence. "I borrowed this from my cousin. Black silk, your size. You're going to put it on, and you're going to walk into that ballroom, and you are going to remember that you are a woman, not just a schedule." Emma had stared at the garment bag. "I don't know anyone who's going." "You know me. You'll spend the whole night talking to donors. Then you'll have an adventure." Dana had smiled that wide, reckless smile that had gotten both of them into trouble since the 7th grade. "Emma, when is the last time you had an adventure?" She couldn't answer that. That was the problem. The dress was a mistake. Emma knew it the moment she put it on. Not because it was inappropriate. Not because it was too much. It was a mistake because it fit her perfectly. And perfection was the one thing Emma had never learned how to wear. The black silk moved with her. It caught the light at exactly the wrong moments, or maybe the right ones depending on who was doing the looking. It made her shoulders look like something worth touching. It made her stand differently. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror for 11 minutes before Dana knocked on the door and said, "We're going to be late." "I look like someone else." "You look like yourself." Dana's voice came through the door, gentle and firm at the same time. "You've just been hiding her." Emma opened the door. Dana put her hand over her mouth. "What?" Emma said immediately. "Is it too much? I knew it was too much." "Emma Carter." Dana took her by both shoulders. "You are stunning. We are going, right now. And if you try to change, I will physically carry you out of this building." Emma laughed, despite herself. She grabbed her clutch. She told herself it was just one night. The Meridian Hotel ballroom was everything Emma had spent her life avoiding: crystal and candlelight, designer gowns and tailored suits, the low murmur of conversations that all seemed to be about money even when they weren't, waiters who materialized at exactly the right moment and disappeared before you could feel obligated to them, the kind of crowd that had learned generationally how to make exclusion feel elegant. Dana was absorbed within 7 minutes. A foundation director Emma had never heard of materialized at her elbow, and Dana shot Emma an apologetic look over his shoulder before being gently steered toward a cluster of donors near the east wall. Emma was alone. She got a glass of water from a passing waiter. She positioned herself near the windows that overlooked the Chicago skyline and reminded herself that she had survived harder things than a charity gala. She had survived her father leaving when she was 9. She had survived 2 layoffs in the same year. She had survived a relationship with a man who told her repeatedly that she wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads. She could survive this. She was looking out at the city lights, thinking about what she'd order for dinner when she got home, when she became aware of a shift in the room. It was subtle. The kind of atmospheric change that most people don't consciously notice, but that Emma, who had spent decades on the outside of rooms looking in, had trained herself to feel. Conversations didn't stop, but they recalibrated. The way a field of birds all changes direction at once without apparent signal. Something had entered the room, something that rearranged the social geometry simply by existing. Emma turned. He was across the ballroom, and he was watching her. Yet, she would think about that moment for months afterward. The way time did something strange, the way the noise of the room seemed to fall half a tone. She would try to explain it to Dana later, and fail, because she would realize there was no version of the story that didn't sound like the beginning of a romance novel, which was exactly the kind of thinking Emma Carter didn't allow herself. He was tall. That registered first. Then the dark suit perfectly fitted in a way that had nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with authority. Black hair. A face that was angular in the way that suggested not handsomeness exactly, but intensity. The kind of face that meant something had happened to him, and he had survived it, and he had not emerged soft. He was not looking at her dress. He was looking at her like she was a problem he was trying to solve. Emma turned back to the window. Her heart was doing something embarrassing. She gave herself 30 seconds and then walked with what she hoped was complete casualness past the cluster of people near the balcony doors. She needed air. She needed distance. She needed to stop behaving like a woman who'd never been looked at before, because she was 34 years old, and she was not this person. She was 5 steps past him when his voice stopped her cold. "Don't walk past me in that dress again." She turned slowly. Up close, he was worse. More intense. His eyes were dark gray, the color of Chicago sky before a storm, and they were focused on her with an attention that felt almost physical in its weight. Emma made a decision in the space of about 2 seconds. She would not be intimidated. She had not driven 40 minutes in heels to be intimidated by a man with good cheekbones and a superiority complex. "Excuse me," she said. "You heard me." "I think I misheard you," Emma said, keeping her voice pleasant, "because what you just said would be an incredibly strange thing for a stranger to say to a woman he's never met." Something moved across his face. Not a smile exactly, more like the recognition that this conversation was going to be different from what he'd expected. "Adrian Valenti," he said. The name landed. She didn't know why it landed. She couldn't have named him from a lineup 2 minutes ago, but something in the room's air pressure shifted microscopically when he said it, the way it does when a word is spoken that everyone in the vicinity recognizes. 2 men near the bar straightened almost imperceptibly. A woman in a red gown, near the center of the room, glanced over and then looked away with what Emma would later identify as deliberate, studied indifference. "Emma Carter," she said, because she was not going to be the only unnamed person in this exchange. "I know." That stopped her. "You know my name. You came with Dana Marsh. Dana Marsh works for the Leland Foundation. The Leland Foundation is one of tonight's honored partners." His tone was matter-of-fact. Not showing off, just explaining. "I make it my business to know who's in a room. That's either very impressive or very unsettling. Probably both." Emma looked at him for a moment. "I still don't understand what you meant," she said. "About the dress." Adrian Valenti looked at her steadily. "There are people in this room who are watching certain other people. Those people are now also watching you." He said it the way someone might describe weather, a fact of the world. "The dress made you visible in a way you weren't before. I was giving you information. You were giving me an order. I was offering a warning. There's a difference." "Yes," he said. "An order assumes I have authority over you. I don't. The ghost of something crossed his face. A warning is information from someone who has context you don't. Emma stared at him. This was not how she had expected this conversation to go. What kind of context? She asked. He looked across the ballroom at something she couldn't identify, and then back at her. Enjoy your evening, Ms. Carter. Stay near Dana. And if a man named Victor Kresh approaches you, tell him immediately that you're with the Leland Foundation staff. Don't engage beyond that. Then he walked away, and Emma stood in the middle of the most expensive room she'd ever been in, holding a glass of water with the distinct and disorienting sensation that the world had just rearranged itself around her without her consent. She found Dana 20 minutes later. Adrian Valenti just spoke to me, Emma said, keeping her voice low. Dana turned so fast she nearly spilled her champagne. Adrian Valenti spoke to you directly like initiated it. Do you know who he is? Dana looked at her like she'd asked whether gravity was real. Emma, everyone in Chicago knows who Adrian Valenti is. I don't live in that part of Chicago. He runs. Dana glanced around and lowered her voice. They call it a business empire. Import logistics property development. But people talk. There are stories. He's been under federal investigation twice and walked away clean both times, which either means he's innocent or he's smarter than the FBI, and based on everything I've heard, it's the second one. She grabbed Emma's arm. What did he say to you? Emma replayed it. The warning. Victor Kresh. The dress. He told me to be careful. Donna blinked. He told you to be careful? More or less. Adrian Valenti does not tell people to be careful, Emma. Adrian Valenti either ignores people or... She stopped. Or what? Or he considers them significant in some way. Dana's eyes were doing something complicated. Which are you? Emma didn't have an answer. She didn't have one for the rest of the night either. She stayed near Dana. She watched the room. And twice she counted twice, she felt the weight of Adrian Valenti's attention from across the ballroom, that specific and particular pressure of being seen by someone who saw very few things. She didn't walk past him again. She told herself it was because she didn't have a reason to, not because he'd asked her not to. She had never in her life done something just because a man had told her to. She went home at 10:30. She thanked Dana. She took off the dress and hung it carefully over the chair in her bedroom, and she lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling. Don't walk past me in that dress again. It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't a threat. She ran it through her mind like a puzzle with a missing piece, turning it, looking at it from different angles. What had he seen? What did he know that she didn't? She fell asleep, telling herself it didn't matter. She was nobody. He was Adrian Valenti. Their conversation was a strange footnote in an evening she hadn't wanted to attend, and by Monday morning, it would feel like something she'd half imagined. She was wrong about all of it. The black car was outside her building at 7:15 the next morning. Emma saw it when she came down the steps with her coffee, heading for the train that would take her to her first job. It was not a car that belonged on her street. Her street had aging sedans and the occasional delivery truck, and Mrs. Piotrowski from the third floor, who walked her arthritic beagle at exactly this hour every morning. The car was long and dark, and so conspicuously expensive that it made everything around it look like a theater set. Emma stopped on the bottom step. The back window went down. Adrian Valenti looked at her across the 8 feet of sidewalk between them. "Get in," he said. Emma didn't move. Absolutely not. Emma, you don't know me. I don't know you. Whatever last night was, it's over. She gripped her coffee cup. I have a job. I have a train to catch. Your shift at the Leland Foundation office starts at 8:45, he said. And your afternoon shift at the restaurant starts at 2. You have time. The fact that he knew her schedule landed like a cold hand on the back of her neck. That is not reassuring, she said. That is the opposite of reassuring. That should disqualify whatever you're about to ask of me, because a man who researches a woman's daily schedule without her permission is not a man I need to be getting into a car with. Victor Kresh photographed you last night. Adrian's voice stayed even. 3 times. The photos were sent to someone in the Maranzano family within the hour. By midnight, your name had been run through 2 databases. Emma went still. The morning felt different. The light felt different. I don't know what that means, she said. But her voice was quieter now. It means you are no longer invisible, Adrian said. Whatever you thought you were before last night, those people now have your name, your face, and according to the databases, they ran your address. The coffee cup was cold in her hand. Why? She asked. The word came out smaller than she intended. I'm nobody. I'm nobody, why would they? Because you were standing near Dante Maranzano in the 3rd photo. He watched her face. He's the Don's youngest son. He's currently at the center of a federal investigation. Anyone seen close to him at a private event becomes a point of interest. A pause. It doesn't matter that you didn't know him. It matters that the photo exists. Emma sat down on the bottom step of her building. She didn't plan to. Her legs just made the decision without consulting her. This isn't real, she said, not really to him. I went to a party. I wore a dress. I don't live in this world. I'm a grant writer and a restaurant hostess. I can't be. This isn't... Emma. His voice changed, just slightly, just enough. Look at me. She looked at him. I know this isn't your world, he said. I know exactly who you are and where you came from and why none of this should be touching you. He held her gaze. And I'm telling you that it is touching you anyway. That is not your fault. But it is your reality right now. A pause. I can help you, or I can watch you walk to the train station uninformed. That's the choice I'm giving you. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to the car, and got in. Start from the beginning, she said once the door closed. And don't leave anything out because you think I can't handle it. Adrian looked at her with something that might have been the earliest version of respect. You handled last night better than most people would have. I had no idea what was happening last night. That's not the same as handling it. She turned to face him. Tell me who Victor Kresh is. A mid-level operator for the Maranzano family. He handles logistics and surveillance. His job at events like last night's is to document who attends, who speaks to whom, who's adjacent to whom. Adrian's voice was clinical, precise, the voice of someone who had grown up translating the world into threat assessments. He photographed you because you were standing near Dante. That's it. That's the whole reason. You were in the wrong place. Because of the dress. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. The dress made you visible, but you would have been photographed regardless if you were near Dante. He paused. The dress just meant that once Kresh had the photos, you were memorable. Emma absorbed this. So, what does memorable mean? What do they do with it? Probably nothing, Adrian said. If you stay out of their line of sight. If you don't make contact with anyone connected to Dante Maranzano. If you live your life exactly as you were living it before last night. He looked at her carefully. But I can't guarantee that, and I'm not willing to guess. So what are you proposing? A few days, somewhere secure, until I can determine the level of interest and make sure Kresh and whoever he's reporting to understand that you're a random civilian with no connection to anything relevant. Emma stared at him. You want me to disappear for a few days? I want to keep you safe for a few days. Those are different things. Yes, he said again. They are. She looked out the window at her street. Mrs. Piotrowski was still out there with the beagle. The mail carrier was starting his route. The city was doing its morning things, all the ordinary rhythms she'd built her life around. I can't just disappear, Emma said. I have jobs. I have responsibilities. My mother calls me every Sunday, and if I don't answer, she'll... You can contact everyone you need to contact. You'll have a phone. You're not a prisoner. The evenness in his voice didn't waver, but something behind it did. I'm asking you to trust me. I understand that's an enormous thing to ask, given that we've known each other for approximately 14 hours. 13, Emma said. And most of those I was asleep. A pause. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Just slightly. The closest thing to a smile she would see from him for a very long time. 13? He agreed. Emma Carter, who had spent her entire life making careful, measured, sensible decisions, closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Then she said, "If I find out you're not being straight with me about any of this, I will find a way to make your life very difficult. I don't know how yet, but I will figure it out." "I believe you," Adrian said. And the strange thing, the thing she would turn over in her mind for days afterward, was that he didn't sound dismissive when he said it. He didn't sound amused or patronizing or like a man humoring someone smaller than him. He sounded like he meant it. The estate was 40 minutes outside the city. Emma didn't speak during the drive. She watched the urban landscape thin and then give way to something quieter, and she cataloged the facts she had. Adrian Valenti. Mafia adjacent if Dana's information was accurate. 2 federal investigations, no charges. A man who had shown up at her building knowing her schedule and the contents of surveillance photographs taken less than 12 hours ago. She was either making the most rational decision she'd made in years, or the single most catastrophic one. She wasn't sure those were different things. The estate was not what she expected. She'd braced herself for ostentation, the kind of visual declaration of power that men like Adrian used to remind everyone of their position. What she found instead was something almost austere. A stone structure that looked like it had grown from the ground rather than been built on it. Gardens that were not manicured but tended a distinction she felt without being able to articulate it. A quiet that was different from the city's quiet, deeper and less conditional. A woman named Mrs. Callahan met them at the entrance. Mid-60s, capable-looking with warm eyes and the kind of economy of movement that comes from decades of competence. She showed Emma to a room on the 2nd floor. "The guest suite," she said, opening the door. "There's a phone by the bed that connects to outside lines. Mr. Valenti said you should call whoever you need to call. Breakfast is at 7 if you want it. Nobody locks any doors here." Emma looked around the room. "How long have you worked for him?" she asked. Mrs. Callahan smiled. "Since he was 22 and didn't know how to do his own laundry." "Is he?" Emma stopped. She wasn't sure how to ask what she was trying to ask. Mrs. Callahan seemed to understand anyway. "He's a complicated man," she said simply, "like most people who've had complicated lives." She paused at the door. "He's never brought anyone here before, not like this." She let that settle for a moment. "I'm not sure what that means, but I thought you should know it." She left Emma alone with that. Emma sat on the edge of the bed. She called Dana first. "Where are you?" Dana said immediately. "I called you this morning and it went to voicemail, and I panicked." "I'm somewhere safe," Emma said. "I need you to tell work I have a family emergency. A few days. I'll explain everything when I can." A long pause. "Emma, are you with him?" Emma looked around the room. The old stone walls. The deep window that looked out onto the grounds. The quiet that felt like something gathered rather than absent. "Yes," she said. Another pause, longer this time. "Dana, you are the most careful person I have ever met in my entire life," Dana said slowly, "and you just willingly went somewhere with Adrian Valenti after one conversation. I know. That either means he said something incredibly persuasive, or a pause, or you believed him." Emma was quiet. "Emma," Dana said softly, "are you okay?" "I honestly don't know," Emma said. "But I think I'm going to find out." Joe. She didn't see Adrian again until that evening. She'd spent the day in a kind of suspended state, reading, thinking, watching the grounds from the window, trying to reconcile the ordinary mechanics of her day with the extraordinary fact of where she was spending it. She called her mother and said she was visiting a friend outside the city. She ate lunch alone at a table in a kitchen that smelled of lemon and old wood, and something she couldn't identify, something that felt like care. Mrs. Callahan asked her at one point if she needed anything. Emma asked if there were books. There was a library. Of course there was a library. 2 walls of it, with the kind of density that comes from actual reading, rather than decoration. She found herself running her finger along the spines and feeling for the first time all day something that wasn't anxiety. She pulled out a battered copy of a Steinbeck novel and was 3 chapters in when a sound behind her made her turn. Adrian was standing in the doorway. He'd changed from the morning. Still dressed with the same quiet authority, but differently than at the gala, less formal, more present in his own skin. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. "Mrs. Callahan said you'd be in here," he said. He held out one of the cups. Emma looked at it. Then she took it. "I want to know about Victor Kresh," she said. "What's actually happening? Not the simplified version you gave me this morning because you thought I needed to be coaxed into the car." He pulled a chair and sat. Not the chair closest to the door, not the one that maintained maximum distance, the one across from her at the small table between the 2 reading lamps. "You handled this morning well," he said. "You already said that." "It's still true." "Tell me about Kresh." Adrian looked at her for a moment. Then he began to talk. And this was the thing that Emma would remember he didn't simplify. He didn't manage the information. He gave it to her straight in the language of someone who had grown up inside a world she'd only ever glimpsed from the outside, and he trusted her to follow him. Victor Kresh had been documenting attendees at the Meridian Gala because Dante Maranzano, the Don's youngest son, had been meeting informally with members of 3 competing families. Kresh's job was to record who was present, create leverage, or identify potential complications. Emma's image, appearing in 3 clear photographs near Dante, had been flagged because the Maranzano family's current posture with the federal investigation closing in made them deeply suspicious of anyone adjacent to Dante, who they couldn't immediately identify and explain. "They won't hurt you," Adrian said. "Not right now. The last thing they want is a random civilian woman becoming a news story. But they will watch you. They will know where you live, where you work, who you know. And if at any point they become convinced that you're connected to the federal investigation through me, through Dante, through anyone, the calculus changes." "Through you," Emma said. She set down the coffee cup. "I need you to say that plainly. Am I in danger because of my connection to you, or because of Dante?" Adrian looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. "Both," he said. "After this morning. After I pulled you out of your apartment in a car, they'll have recorded both." The honesty of it hit her like cold water. "So in trying to protect me, I may have complicated things." His jaw tightened. "Yes." Emma looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at problems she was trying to solve fully without flinching, turning it from every angle. "Why?" she said. "Why what? Why does it matter to you?" Her voice was steady. "You don't know me. I was a stranger in a room. You could have watched the situation and decided it wasn't your concern. You could have—" "I could have," he said. "So why didn't you?" The room was quiet. Adrian Valenti, who had navigated this city's most dangerous and complex human terrain for over a decade, who had sat across from federal prosecutors and rival crime bosses and men who had wanted him dead, looked at a woman he had known for less than a day and told her the first honest thing he had said to anyone in longer than he could calculate. "Because you laughed," he said. Emma blinked. "What?" "When I spoke to you at the gala." He looked at his coffee cup. "You laughed. Because you thought I was being arrogant. Because you didn't know who I was, and even if you had, I don't think it would have changed anything." He paused. "Do you know how long it's been since someone laughed at me? Not out of nervousness, not trying to manage me, just laughed. Because they thought I was being ridiculous." Emma stared at him. "That's why," she said. "That's part of it." "What's the other part?" He looked up at her. "You walked away," he said simply, immediately, without looking back to see if I was watching. The silence between them was different now. It had a texture it hadn't had before. Emma picked up her coffee cup. She looked at the Steinbeck novel in her lap. She thought about the dress hanging over the chair in her bedroom 60 miles away. Adrian, she said. Yes. If I'm going to be here, I need to understand the rules. All of them. Not the ones designed to keep me calm. The actual rules. He studied her for a long moment. All right, he said. And that night in the library that smelled of old paper and possibility, Adrian Valenti told Emma Carter the truth about his world. The danger, the structure, the names, the precise nature of what she had accidentally walked into. He told her all of it, and Emma Carter, who had spent 34 years making herself invisible, listened with the complete and focused attention of a woman who had finally terrifyingly, and against every plan she had ever made for her life, become visible to someone who actually deserved to see her. Outside, somewhere on the grounds, a security team she hadn't known was there moved quietly through the dark. And in 3 different locations across Chicago, Victor Kresch's photographs of a woman in a black silk dress were being studied by people who had not yet decided what she meant. But they were going to. And by the time they did, Emma Carter would not be the woman they were expecting. She woke up at 5:47 in the morning because something had changed. Not in the room. The room was exactly as she'd left it. The old stone walls, the deep window, the Steinbeck novel face down on the nightstand where she'd abandoned it somewhere past midnight. Nothing had moved. Nothing had made a sound. But Emma Carter had spent enough years sleeping lightly in apartments with thin walls and uncertain locks to know the difference between a room that was at peace and a room that was holding its breath. She lay still for 30 seconds. Then she got up, crossed to the window, and looked out. Adrian was standing in the garden below. Alone. No jacket despite the early cold. A phone pressed to his ear, and his free hand at his side curled not quite into a fist. His head was slightly bowed. Whatever he was hearing, he wasn't arguing with it. He was absorbing it the way a man absorbs something he already suspected, but had hoped wasn't true. He ended the call and stood without moving for a long moment. Then he looked up. He couldn't have known she was there. The window was dark, and she'd stepped to the side out of instinct. But he looked up at exactly her window, at exactly the right angle, and for 3 seconds, Emma felt caught in something she couldn't name. She stepped back. She sat on the edge of the bed. She told herself she wasn't afraid. She was lying. Breakfast was quiet, in the way that meant something had shifted. Mrs. Callahan moved through the kitchen with her usual competence, but with a particular economy of expression, the face of a woman who knew more than she was saying. Adrian came in at 7:20. He poured his own coffee. He sat across from Emma without preamble or greeting and said, "Kresch moved faster than I expected." Emma set down her fork. "Tell me." "He identified your employer, both of them." Adrian's voice was controlled. "He also ran your financial history, your mother's address in Evanston." A pause, a short one, but waited. "They're thorough when they're interested." The air went out of Emma's lungs. "My mother," she said. "She's fine. Nothing has happened. But I have someone watching her building as of 40 minutes ago." He looked at her directly. "I need you to know all of it." Emma pressed both palms flat on the table. She needed the solidity of it. "Because you caused this," she said. It wasn't an accusation exactly. It was just the fact stated plainly, because Emma had never been someone who arranged facts into more comfortable shapes. Adrian didn't look away. "Coming to you yesterday accelerated it, yes." "So you made a decision that affected my life without asking me?" "Yes." "And you were wrong. I thought I had more time." A muscle moved in his jaw. "I was wrong about that." Emma studied him. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't managing her or trying to redirect. He was sitting with the wrongness of it in a way that felt genuinely uncomfortable for him, and that discomfort looked real. "How do we fix it?" she asked. Something in his posture changed, not much, but something. "You're not asking me to take you home," he said. Taking me home doesn't unflag my mother's address. Emma picked her fork back up because she needed something to do with her hands. What do we do? Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he started talking. The plan as he laid it out over coffee she didn't taste had 3 components. First, Adrian would reach out through intermediaries to the Maranzano family's communication channels and establish clearly that Emma was a civilian. No federal connections, no family connections, no value as a pressure point. Second, the federal investigation into Dante Maranzano needed to become someone else's problem quickly, because as long as that investigation was active, anyone adjacent to Dante remained a variable. Third, Emma needed to stay put until the first 2 were resolved, because moving her back to her apartment before Kresh's people had lost interest was exactly the kind of move that would confirm she mattered. How long? Emma asked. A week, maybe less. You said a few days last night. Last night I didn't know about your mother's address. He said it evenly. A week, Emma. Possibly 10 days. Emma looked at her coffee cup. She thought about her 2 jobs, her rent, the Sunday call she wouldn't be able to explain, her whole carefully constructed ordinary life sitting 60 miles away, accumulating consequences she'd have to manage when this was over. I need to work, she said. I can do the grant writing remotely if I have a laptop. Done. I need my own space in this house. I'm not comfortable being managed. You can have the run of the estate. Mrs. Callahan answers to herself, not to me. And I need you to tell me everything that happens, not the version you think I can handle. Everything. Adrian met her eyes. I told you everything this morning. You told me everything you knew this morning, Emma corrected. I need you to commit to continuing that, even when you think knowing will frighten me. And if it does frighten you, that's my business. She held his gaze. Do we have an agreement? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of resistance. The quiet of a man who wasn't accustomed to being negotiated with as an equal and was recalibrating. Yes, he said. We have an agreement. The laptop arrived by noon. Emma set herself up at the table in the library and worked with the focused efficiency of someone who has learned to compartmentalize because the alternative is falling apart. She answered emails. She finalized 3 grant reports. She responded to her supervisor's slightly confused message about the family emergency with enough specific detail to be believable. She was halfway through a budget reconciliation when the sound of raised voices reached her from somewhere else in the house. Not loud, not dramatic, but sharp and in a language she didn't speak, and then in English, 2 words flat and hard from Adrian's voice. That's enough. Silence. Emma kept her eyes on the screen. 20 minutes later, Adrian came into the library. He looked at her setup without comment. He sat in the chair across from her. Marco thinks you're a liability, he said. Emma looked up from the laptop. Marco? My second. He's been with me for 9 years. A pause. He thinks bringing you here was emotional rather than strategic, and that the Maranzano situation would be easier to resolve if you weren't on the property. Emma held his gaze. What do you think? I think Marco is right about the strategic complexity, Adrian said, and I think it doesn't change anything. Why not? He looked at her steadily. Because you didn't choose this, and I don't fix problems by creating them for other people. Emma went back to the budget reconciliation. After a moment, she said without looking up, What did you tell him? That the decision was made and it wasn't open for discussion. He didn't like that. Marco rarely likes my decisions. He's still here after 9 years, so we've learned to work around it. A pause. He's not wrong that this is complicated. He's not wrong, Emma agreed. Neither are you. She saved the document she was working on. Adrian, what does Victor Kresh actually want? Right now, clarity. He wants to know what you are. And what am I? Adrian looked at her for a long moment. That, he said quietly, is an excellent question. Tia. She found out about the deliveries by accident. She was looking for Mrs. Callahan that afternoon when she passed the back entrance and saw something she wasn't supposed to see, not because anyone was hiding it, but because it was so ordinary. It existed outside the frame of what she'd expected this place to contain. There were boxes, grocery boxes, medicine boxes, a crate of what looked like children's shoes, 3 men loading them into a plain white van, and standing beside the van, talking to a woman Emma didn't know was Adrian, without the authority posture, without the controlled distance. He was listening to the woman, middle-aged, tired in the specific way that means money is always tight, with the kind of complete attention he had given Emma in the library the night before. Emma heard him say, "The pharmacy on Foster will hold it under my account. Tell Raymond I said to use it." The woman said something Emma couldn't hear. Adrian said, "It's not charity. Raymond fixed 3 of my vehicles before his hands gave out. This is an accounting matter." The woman laughed, genuine and surprised. Adrian almost smiled. Emma stepped back before he could see her and stood in the hallway processing what she'd just witnessed with the thorough and unsentimental honesty she applied to everything. He was feeding people, medicating people, quietly through side doors without the vocabulary of philanthropy or the apparatus of goodwill, like it was accounting. She filed it away. That night she asked Mrs. Callahan about it over the dinner she'd helped prepare, because staying still made her anxious and chopping vegetables was something real she could do with her hands. "How often does that happen?" "The deliveries." Mrs. Callahan was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that calculates how much to say. 3 times a week, she said finally, sometimes more in winter. "Does he talk about it?" "Adrian." Mrs. Callahan almost laughed. "He'd sooner discuss his tax returns." She set a pot on the stove. "He grew up in that neighborhood, on those blocks. Before his father—" She stopped. "Before things changed. He never forgot what it felt like to need something and not have anyone who could provide it." Emma kept her eyes on the carrots she was cutting. "His father," she said. "Not a question exactly. Not my story to tell," Mrs. Callahan said simply. "But if you want to understand Adrian Valenti, and I think you do, that's where you start." Emma filed that away too. The second day passed. The third began. Emma settled into the estate's rhythms with the adaptability of someone who had never had the luxury of requiring things to be perfect before she could function. She worked in the mornings. She walked the grounds in the afternoons, not because she'd been told she could, but because no one had told her she couldn't, and she needed movement to think. She ate with Mrs. Callahan when Adrian was occupied, and with Adrian when he wasn't, and these meals became something she hadn't expected. He talked. Not about himself exactly, but about the world, the city, its mechanics, the way money and power and community braided together in ways that the people on the outside of those systems rarely got to see. He talked about it analytically, the way someone talks about geography, factual and observational, and Emma asked questions the way she always did, directly, without cushioning, and he answered them. On the third evening she asked, "How did you end up in this world?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was born into it." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's a deflection." He looked at his hands. "My father was connected to certain people. When I was old enough, I was expected to be useful to those connections." "And you didn't refuse?" "I was 17, Adrian said. And refusing meant something different in that context than it does in most. Emma looked at him. "It meant they'd hurt you. It meant they'd hurt someone I cared about instead." A pause, which is a more efficient form of compliance. The room was quiet. "Who?" Emma asked. Adrian looked at her. "My younger brother, Daniel." His voice didn't change, but something behind it did. He was 12. He had a gift for mathematics that had nothing to do with any of this. He was going to be... He stopped. "He's an engineer in Portland now. He doesn't know half of what I did to make sure he got there." Emma said nothing. Sometimes silence was the most honest response. "I stayed in this world," Adrian continued, "because leaving has a cost, And I have spent 15 years trying to make the math work out so that the cost goes down. He looked at her. That probably sounds like a rationalization. It sounds like the truth, Emma said. Whether it's also a rationalization is a different question. He looked at her. I can't tell, she said honestly. Whether you're a good man making bad choices or a complicated man making the best choices available to him. I don't think that's something I can determine from the outside. Most people don't think about it that carefully. Most people haven't been pulled out of their lives by you. A pause. Then, fair. Emma picked up her water glass. For what it's worth, she said, those deliveries on Tuesday. Whoever you were before you were this, some of that person is still here. Adrian looked at her for a long time. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. On the fourth morning, everything changed. Emma was in the library working when she heard the front door, not the back, not a side entrance, but the main door with the kind of authority that doesn't knock first. She heard voices in the entrance hall. Adrian's clipped and controlled. Another man's lower carrying a weight that felt different from Marco's frustrated loyalty. Older, more settled in its own certainty. She kept working. 20 minutes later, Adrian came into the library. His face was the same. That was the thing about Adrian. His face rarely changed in any obvious way. But Emma had been watching him for 4 days, and she had learned his face the way you learn a room you spend a lot of time in. You stop seeing the furniture and start feeling the atmosphere. The atmosphere was wrong. Who was that? She asked. No one you need to concern yourself with right now. Emma looked up from the laptop. We had an agreement. His jaw tightened slightly. Sal Benedetti. He's a senior member of the Maranzano organization. Emma set the laptop aside. He came here. Yes. They know where this estate is. They've always known. It's not a secret location. A pause. They've simply never had a reason to send Benedetti before. And now they do. Emma stood. What did he say? Adrian looked at her. For a moment she thought he was going to manage the information, and she felt a flare of something sharp and anticipatory, prepared to push back, prepared to hold him to the agreement. But he didn't. He said they want a conversation, Adrian said. With you. The word landed like a dropped stone. With me, Emma repeated. They want to verify that you have no federal connection, directly, in person. His voice stayed level. Benedetti said they'd prefer to clarify the situation rather than allow ambiguity. And what does that mean exactly? What does a conversation with Sal Benedetti involve? It involves them asking questions and you answering them. Adrian's eyes held hers. You're not connected to anything federal. You have nothing to hide. In theory, a direct conversation would resolve this. In theory, Emma said, yes. What's the non-theory version? Adrian crossed his arms. The non-theory version is that agreeing to the conversation signals that I accept their right to question someone under my protection, which changes the power dynamic in ways that could complicate other things. A pause. Refusing signals that I'm hiding something which also complicates things. Emma took a breath. So either way, I'm a piece in a game I didn't choose to enter. Yes. He said it without softening it. I'm sorry. Emma looked at him. Adrian Valenti, who she had now watched operate in and around his world for 4 days, had used a word she hadn't heard from him before. And he said it the way people say things they mean, rather than things they've learned to say quietly without performance, with the specific gravity of someone who doesn't say it often. What do you recommend? She asked. I recommend we don't agree to anything today. I need 24 hours to verify Benedetti's actual position within the current organization and whether this request is sanctioned from above or a freelance move. He held her gaze. I won't put you in front of them without understanding exactly what they want. Emma nodded once. 24 hours. Yes. And you'll tell me what you find. Every piece of it. Emma turned back to the library table. She picked up the laptop. She opened it. Emma, Adrian said. She looked up. You should know. He said carefully that Benedetti's visit means the situation has escalated. This is no longer about a photograph at a gala. His voice was precise. Somewhere in the last 4 days, you went from a variable to a factor. Emma held his gaze. I understand, she said. You're not afraid. I'm extremely afraid, Emma said calmly. But I'm also capable of being afraid and functional at the same time. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Something moved across his face. The ghost of something that had no place in the world he'd built, but kept appearing anyway. He left her alone. Emma opened a document and stared at it without reading a word. Then she put her hands on the keys and started to work, because terror was not a reason to stop, and she had never in her life let a reason stop her when the reason was fear. She found Marco at the back of the house that evening. She'd been looking for him deliberately, which she hadn't told Adrian because she suspected he would have had complicated feelings about it. Marco was a compact man in his early 40s, with dark eyes and the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from long practice at containing things. He was leaning against the wall outside the kitchen with a coffee he wasn't drinking, and he didn't look surprised to see her, which she thought probably meant he'd known she was coming. You wanted to say something to me this morning, Emma said. The thing you said to Adrian? Say it to me. Marco looked at her for a long moment. He told you about that. He tells me things. That was the agreement. There's an agreement. Marco said it flatly. Yes. Emma stood her ground. Say what you want to say. Marco studied her the way someone studies a structural problem assessing weight angles, potential failure points. You're not what he said you were, Marco said finally. What did he say I was? Someone who needed protecting. He looked at her steadily. That's not wrong exactly, but it's not all you are. Emma waited. The problem, Marco said, is that you're interesting to him. Adrian doesn't get interested in people. He gets responsible for them. He gets obligated to them. He gets strategically connected to them. But interested? He shook his head. I haven't seen that in a long time. A pause. Interest is a distraction. In this world, distraction gets people killed. Emma looked at him carefully. You're not warning me off. You're warning me that he's vulnerable. Marco said nothing, which was an answer. I didn't choose to be here, Emma said quietly. I didn't choose any of this. But since I am here, I'm not going to pretend I don't see what I see. She held his gaze. I'm not a distraction to him, Marco. I'm a consequence. There's a difference. Marco looked at her for a long time. Then he uncrossed his arms and stood straight. Benedetti's visit, he said. It wasn't sanctioned by the Dawn. Emma went still. What? I've been tracking the Maranzano communication channels since Tuesday. Benedetti moved independently. Marco's voice was flat and factual. The Dawn doesn't know you're here. Kresh doesn't report to the Dawn on this. He reports to Benedetti. The implications assembled themselves in Emma's mind with rapid and unpleasant clarity. So the man who came here today, Emma said slowly, isn't operating on behalf of the Maranzano family. He's operating on behalf of Benedetti. And what does Benedetti want? Marco looked at her, and the look told her that this was the part of the information he'd been waiting to verify before he brought it to Adrian, and hadn't brought it yet, and was now bringing it to her first, because something about the conversation had changed the calculation. He wants leverage, Marco said, not on you, on Adrian. A pause. You were an accident at that gala, Ms. Carter. But the moment Adrian moved on your behalf, you became something else. Emma's voice was very quiet. I became a way to get to him. Yes. The silence between them was heavy with the weight of it. Marco, Emma said. Have you told Adrian this? I was going to tell him tonight. Tell him now. She turned toward the house. Then she stopped and looked back. And Marco. Thank you for telling me first. I know you didn't have to. Marco looked at her with an expression she couldn't read and didn't try to. He was right about one thing, Marco said. You don't belong in this world. Emma looked at him steadily. No, but I'm here. She went to find Adrian. She found him in the study off the main hall on the phone again. The same posture she'd seen through the window that first morning, head slightly bowed, absorbing. He looked up when she came in. Something in her face made him say into the phone, "I'll call you back," and end the call. "Benedetti isn't operating with Maranzano's authorization," Emma said. Adrian's expression sharpened. "How do you—" "I talked to Marco." A pause. Very brief, but distinct. "You went to Marco. He needed to tell someone. I was available." Emma sat down across from him. "He's going to tell you now, but I wanted to say this first." She looked at him directly the way she'd looked at everything in her life that mattered, without flinching, without prettying it up. "They want leverage on you. That's what this has been since Tuesday. Not me. You." Adrian was very still. "I'm the way they get to you," Emma said. "Because you moved for me. Because you showed that I mattered to you, and now they know I exist as a pressure point." Her voice was steady. "Which means the safest thing, the most logical, strategic, tactically sound thing, is for me to be somewhere they can't reach me. Not because of what they'd do to me. Because of what they'd make you do to protect me." The stillness in Adrian didn't break. But something behind it did. Something shifted in his eyes, deep and controlled and sharp, with something she had no clean word for. "Emma, I'm not saying leave," she said quickly. "I'm saying we need to be clear about what's actually happening. Because you've been treating this as a protection problem, a security problem. You've been asking how to keep me safe." She leaned forward slightly. "But that's not the right question anymore. The right question is, how do we take away the leverage? How do we make me useless to Benedetti as a pressure point on you?" Adrian looked at her. The silence stretched. Marco appeared in the doorway behind her. He glanced between them and clearly read that Emma had already delivered his information. "She talked to you," Adrian said to Marco. "Not a question." "She found me," Marco said. "I wouldn't have." Adrian's eyes moved back to Emma. "You went around me," he said. "I went to someone with information that was relevant to my situation," Emma said. "You want to call that going around you, that's your prerogative." Emma. Adrian. They looked at each other. And in the specific and unmistakable way that important things sometimes happen, not with announcement, not with drama, but with the quiet, settling certainty of something finally named. Something shifted between them that had been building since a ballroom and a black silk dress, and one warning neither of them had fully understood. "You're right," Adrian said. The words came out like they cost something. About the leverage. About the question. He looked at Marco. "Get Rinaldi on the phone, not through the usual channel direct. Tell him I need a conversation about Benedetti." Marco nodded and stepped back. Adrian looked at Emma. "What you just did," he said. "Going to Marco, identifying the actual problem, presenting it directly." His voice was careful. "That was not the behavior of a woman who needs protecting." Emma looked at him. "No," she said. "It wasn't." A pause. "I never was, Adrian. You made an assumption." "I know." "So did Benedetti," she said. "He assumed I was just leverage, a passive pressure point." She held his gaze. "Both of you made the same mistake." Adrian Valenti, who had not miscalculated a person in over a decade, looked at Emma Carter and understood fully, irreversibly, with the precision of a man who did not allow himself to misread things twice, that he had underestimated her from the moment she laughed at him in a ballroom. And the most dangerous thing about that realization wasn't what it meant for Benedetti, or for the Maranzano situation, or for the 17 complicated moving parts of the world he operated in. The most dangerous thing was what it was doing to the part of him that had stopped feeling things on purpose a long time ago, in a room with his father, when he'd decided that feeling was something he could not afford. That part was waking up, and he had no idea what to do with it. Rinaldi called back in 40 minutes. Emma knew because she heard Adrian's voice change through the wall of the study, not in volume, not in tone, but in the specific frequency of a man who has just received information that reorganizes everything he thought he knew. She was in the library with the laptop open and a grant report she'd been staring at without reading for 20 minutes. She closed the laptop. She waited. Marco passed the doorway twice without looking at her, which meant he was processing something and didn't want to be read. Emma had learned his tells faster than she'd expected. Marco communicated more clearly in what he didn't do than in what he did. Adrian came to the library at 9:14. He didn't sit. That was the first signal. "Rinaldi is a federal informant," Adrian said. "He has been for 18 months. Emma looked at him. "Your contact." "My contact," Adrian confirmed. The two words carried something heavy. "The man I've been using as a back channel to the Maranzano organization, the man I was about to call to resolve your situation, has been feeding information to the FBI for a year and a half." Emma absorbed this with the particular stillness she'd developed over 4 days of absorbing things that had no comfortable shape. "Does he know about me?" she asked. "Did he report the conversation you just had? That's what I'm trying to determine." Adrian's voice stayed controlled, but his hands, she'd learned his hands too, were not relaxed at his sides. "If Rinaldi has been compromised for 18 months, then every back-channel communication I've had in that period is potentially in a federal file. Including the conversations about bringing me here." "Yes." Emma stood. She didn't pace. Pacing was for people who needed motion to think, and Emma thought better still, but she stood because sitting felt like passivity, and this was not a passive moment. "So we have Benedetti moving independently against you," she said, "and now a federal layer that may or may not know you took me out of my apartment." She worked through it methodically. "Which means if the FBI is watching you, they've watched you move a civilian to a secure location, and without context, that looks like—" "Exactly what it looks like," Adrian said. "Yes." Emma looked at him. "Adrian, what does it look like?" He met her gaze. "It looks like I took someone who has a connection to the Dante Maranzano investigation and removed them from federal surveillance range." The silence that followed was one of the more uncomfortable Emma had experienced, and she'd had several uncomfortable silences over the past 4 days. "I need to think," she said. "Emma, give me 20 minutes. She picked up her phone. "And I need Dana's number verified as clean. If I make a call right now, will it be monitored? Use the house landline, 2nd floor." Adrian watched her. "Emma, I want to be clear about something before you—" "20 minutes," she said, not unkindly, but firmly. She went upstairs. "Done." Dana answered on the second ring with the voice of someone who had been waiting. "Tell me something real," Emma said. "I need a voice from my actual life. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I need information. You work in nonprofit development, which means you know people who know people. Have you heard anything about the Maranzano federal investigation, specifically whether it's connected to anyone named Benedetti?" A long pause. "Emma, what is happening in that house?" "Dana, please." Another pause. The sound of Dana thinking, which Emma had known since 7th grade. A specific quiet that meant she was pulling things from different mental files. "Sal Benedetti," Dana said slowly. "I've heard that name. Not from the Foundation, from a journalism contact I have." He was describing a federal investigation that had been running for 2 years and had gone sideways. He said there was an informant inside the Maranzano organization who'd been discovered by a faction within the family, not the Don, but someone close to the Don. He said that faction was trying to clean house before the feds could act. A pause. "Emma, is Benedetti the one who found the informant?" Emma closed her eyes. The shape of it assembled with horrible clarity. Rinaldi hadn't been discovered. Rinaldi was still active, still reporting. But Benedetti, who was moving independently of the Don who had come here without authorization, Benedetti was the faction trying to clean house. And Rinaldi was one of the pieces he was trying to move before the federal case closed in. which meant Rinaldi's call to Adrian tonight wasn't an informant sharing intelligence. It was Benedetti through Rinaldi finding out exactly what Adrian knew. "Dana," Emma said carefully, "I need you to listen to me. Don't ask questions yet. Do you have the number of anyone at the FBI Chicago field office? Anyone at all? A contact? A name? Anything?" A very long pause. "My journalism contact does," Dana said. "Emma, are you in danger?" "Not right now," Emma said. "But I need that contact, and I need you to not tell anyone you spoke to me tonight." "Emma." "Dana, trust me. I've trusted you for 22 years. Fine." The sound of keys on a phone. "His name is Agent Paul Reyes. My contact says he's been running the Maranzano case. I'm texting you his number." "Thank you." Emma's voice softened for just a moment. "I'm okay. I promise." "You promise." "I promise." She ended the call. She looked at the text that came through. She looked at the number for a long time. Then she went back downstairs. Adrian was in the hallway. He looked at her face and didn't ask what the 20 minutes had produced. Her expression was apparently sufficient information. "You figured something out," he said. "Rinaldi isn't just a federal informant," Emma said. "He's Benedetti's informant. Benedetti found him and flipped the information flow. He's been using Rinaldi to find out what the feds know and to find out what you know. Tonight's phone call wasn't intelligence sharing. It was a probe. The stillness that came over Adrian was the deepest she'd seen from him yet. It was the stillness of a man who has just discovered that the foundation of something was wrong the entire time, not cracked, not damaged, but fundamentally wrong. "How long have you—" "I worked it out in the last 20 minutes, Emma said, with help from Dana. She held up the phone with the number on the screen. "Agent Paul Reyes, FBI Chicago. He's been running the Maranzano case." Adrian stared at the phone, then at her, then at the phone again. "You're suggesting I contact the FBI," he said. "I'm suggesting that Benedetti's play only works if he controls the information flow in all directions. He controls what the feds think they know through Rinaldi. He controls what you do by using me as leverage." Emma held his gaze. "If you contact Reyes directly, not through Rinaldi, not through any channel Benedetti has access to, you remove the information monopoly. Benedetti stops being able to play both sides because both sides are now talking to each other." Adrian looked at her. "Emma," he said, "you understand what you're asking me to do?" "I understand exactly what I'm asking you to do. The FBI isn't— I'm not someone who contacts the FBI. You're someone who wants Benedetti to stop using me as a lever." She kept her voice steady. "You're someone who has 2 federal investigations behind him with no charges, which means either you're clean enough that talking to Reyes doesn't destroy you, or you're good enough at what you do that you can control the conversation." A pause. "Which is it?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You are," he said quietly, "the most unexpected person I have ever met." "Is that a yes?" The corner of his mouth moved. "That is a— I need an hour to prepare for this conversation." "You have 45 minutes, Emma said, "because whatever Benedetti learned from tonight's call, he's going to act on it quickly." Marco's reaction to the plan was predictably strong. Emma sat at the kitchen table and listened to the two of them through the half-open door of the study. Not eavesdropping exactly, but not eavesdropping as Marco presented every reason. The idea was professionally catastrophic, strategically insane, and personally reckless. His voice stayed controlled throughout, which she'd learned meant he was more concerned, not less. Raised voices from Marco meant frustration. Controlled ones meant fear. "She's a civilian who's been here 4 days, Marco said. "She's not— She identified Rinaldi in 20 minutes, Adrian said. "Adrian, with a phone call and context I gave her. 20 minutes, Marco." A pause. "When did you figure out Benedetti's angle?" A silence that answered the question. "She's right about the information monopoly," Adrian said. "Benedetti needs to control what Reyes knows and what I do simultaneously. The only way to break that is to— To walk into a federal conversation with no preparation and no guarantee that Reyes doesn't just arrest you for whatever's convenient. Marco's voice was tight. You are proposing to trust a woman you've known for 4 days and a federal agent you've never spoken to. I'm proposing to take away Benedetti's leverage before he uses it, at the cost of your entire Marco. Adrian's voice dropped, not louder, quieter. The specific quiet that Emma had learned meant the conversation was over. I know what it costs. I've calculated it. Set up a clean line for Reyes. A long pause. Then Marco's footsteps moved toward the door. Emma looked at her coffee cup when he appeared. Marco looked at her. His face was complicated in the way that meant several competing things were happening in it simultaneously. If this goes wrong, he said, I want you to know it's not personal. Emma looked up at him. I know, she said. And Marco, if it goes right, I want you to let yourself believe it was the correct call. You don't have to like it. Just believe it. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he went to set up the line. Emma wasn't in the room when Adrian spoke to Reyes. She sat in the library and she waited, and she did not pretend to herself that she wasn't afraid. She was afraid in the specific way of someone who has set something in motion and cannot take it back, the fear that lives not in the unknown, but in the waiting for the known to arrive. She thought about her apartment. The exact particular smell of it, the way the afternoon light came through the east window in a specific pattern she'd memorized without meaning to. The beagle downstairs. Her Sunday calls with her mother. The restaurant at 2 in the afternoon, the specific gravity of ordinary life that she had taken for granted because she'd never had occasion not to. She thought about the dress which was still at her apartment, still draped over the chair where she'd left it. She thought about Adrian Valenti saying I was afraid because I knew you could change me. He hadn't said that. Not yet. That was still coming. But she'd felt it anyway, moving beneath the surface of every conversation they'd had, in the specific quality of his attention, in the way he sat across from her and gave her information without managing it, the behavior of a man who was unconsciously treating someone as a partner before he'd consciously admitted it. She was thinking about all of this when the door opened and Adrian came in. His face was the controlled neutral she'd learned to read beneath. Behind it, something complex. Something that hadn't resolved yet. Reyes knew about Rinaldi, Adrian said. Not that Benedetti had flipped him, they still thought Rinaldi was clean. But they'd had doubts for 6 weeks. He sat down. Your theory about the information flow confirmed something they'd been suspicious of. Emma's breath came out slowly. So they believed you. They believed the information. Whether they believe me personally is a different conversation. He looked at his hands. Reyes wants a formal meeting, tomorrow. He says I'm not under arrest. He says I'm not a target of the current investigation. A pause. He says, and I want to be exact about this, he says I'm someone who may have information material to the Benedetti matter, and he'd like to discuss that in a cooperative rather than adversarial frame. Emma processed this. That's actually a reasonable offer. It's a reasonable offer from a federal agent, which means I should be extremely careful about what it actually is. He looked up at her. But yes, it's the best possible version of what could have come out of tonight. The room was quiet for a moment. You're scared, Emma said. He looked at her. Not of Reyes, she clarified. Of what comes after. If you sit across from a federal agent and give him what he needs to close the Benedetti case, what that means for the rest of the structure. Your businesses. Your people. She held his gaze. You've been trying to rebuild legally for a long time. This accelerates it. And acceleration of something you're not finished building is terrifying, Adrian said simply. The word landed with a weight that had nothing to do with the federal case. He had used it. Not a measured substitute, not a controlled euphemism. Terrifying. Emma looked at him. You've been doing this alone, she said. The whole time. The rebuilding, the deliveries, the calculations about what it costs and whether the math works out. She paused. You've been doing it without telling anyone what it's actually for? Marco knows. Marco knows the strategy. He doesn't know what it means to you. She watched his face. Does he know about Daniel? A pause. He knows I have a brother. Does he know why? Adrian looked at her with the expression of a man who has been accurately read and isn't sure how to feel about it. No, he said. He doesn't know why. Why did you tell me? The question sat between them. Adrian was quiet for long enough that Emma thought he was going to deflect. Then he said, Because you asked in a way that made it feel like the truth was the only reasonable answer. Emma looked at him steadily. Adrian, what happened with your father, Chindang? He told her, not all at once, not with the clean narrative arc of something that had been processed and organized. He told her the way people tell the true things in pieces, some of them out of order, some of them circling back to correct something he'd said before. She listened the way she did everything completely, without filling silences, without softening the hard parts with preemptive comfort. His father, Thomas Valenti, had been a man who understood power in only one language, the language of demonstration. You demonstrated what you were willing to do, and that demonstration became your reputation, and your reputation became your leverage, and your leverage became your life. Thomas had brought Adrian into that system at 17, as Adrian had said. What he hadn't said was that the price of refusal had not been abstract. Thomas had taken Daniel. Not physically, not violence, not yet. He'd taken Daniel's scholarship application and replaced it with a different future. A future in the organization. A demonstration to Adrian that Thomas controlled the variables. Adrian had 2 weeks to make a decision. He made it. He entered the world his father had built. He learned everything his father knew. He became exactly what his father needed him to be: disciplined, precise, unreadable, effective. He spent 3 years doing that. Then he spent the next year making sure that Daniel's acceptance letter to a mathematics program at Northwestern was processed correctly, this time through proper channels without interference. Daniel had never known. Adrian had never told him. He thinks I stayed in this because I wanted it, Adrian said. His voice was level. He thinks I chose it. Did you? Emma asked. I chose to stay after Daniel left, Adrian said. After the reason was gone. So, in that sense, yes. Why? Because leaving had costs I couldn't manage yet. And because by the time I could have managed them, I had people depending on the structure I'd built. He looked at Emma. And because I didn't know what else I was, outside of this. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the specific silence of something true that has been said for the first time. What would you have been, Emma asked, if Thomas hadn't intervened? Adrian looked at her. I wanted to be a lawyer, he said. Criminal defense. A pause. The shadow of something almost self-aware crossed his face. I'm aware of the irony. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then carefully she said, It's not too late for the rebuilding to mean something. What you're doing with the businesses, the people, that's real. The federal meeting tomorrow is real. None of that disappears because the path to it was complicated. Emma, his voice was careful. I'm not romanticizing it, she said. I'm not telling you the past was acceptable or that it didn't cost people things. I'm telling you that the direction matters. The direction you're going now is real. She held his gaze. I see the same thing Mrs. Callahan sees. The same thing Daniel doesn't know to see. You've been paying a debt for 15 years that nobody issued you a receipt for. His jaw tightened slightly. You don't need anything from me, Emma said. I know that. I'm telling you anyway because you gave me your truth and this is mine. A pause. You are not the man your father made. You are the man you chose to become after him. There is a difference. And it matters. The room was completely still. Adrian Valenti, who had been described in 3 separate federal documents as calculating cold and strategically brilliant, sat in the library of the estate he'd built partly as a monument to what his father had turned him into, and looked at a woman who had been in his world for 4 days and had seen more of him than most people managed in a decade. He didn't know what to do with that. He wasn't sure any of his skills were adequate to it. "You should sleep," he said, because it was 11:30 and they had a federal meeting in the morning, and it was the only thing he trusted himself to say. "So should you," Emma said. She picked up the Steinbeck novel from the table where she'd left it. She stood. She crossed to the door. Then she stopped. "Adrian." He looked at her. "What you said to me at the gala." She kept her eyes on the doorframe. That it wasn't a joke. That it was a warning. A pause. "What were you warning me about, really? Not the photograph. Not Kresh." She turned slightly. "What did you actually see?" He was quiet for a long time. "I saw someone," he said finally, "who still had the option of a different life." His voice was quiet. "And I knew that if I didn't say something, that option was going to get complicated." "And if you had said nothing?" Emma asked. "If you'd just let me walk past?" "Then you'd have gone home at 10:30, Adrian said. "You'd have hung up the dress. You'd have gone back to your life. And you?" A pause longer than any that had come before it. "I would have gone back to mine," he said, "and spent a considerable amount of time trying not to think about a woman I didn't know who laughed at me in a ballroom." Emma looked at him. Then she said very quietly, "I think you made the right call." She went upstairs. Adrian sat in the library for a long time afterward, with the specific and unfamiliar feeling of a man who has told the truth to another person and found that the truth outside of himself looked different than it did inside. Less heavy somehow. Like a thing he'd been carrying that someone else had briefly helped him hold. He didn't sleep until well past midnight. Yeah. Morning arrived with the sound of Marco's voice downstairs, clipped and precise, and Emma came down to find the house operating with a different energy. The energy of preparation, of people organizing themselves around something significant. Marco had coffee ready. He handed her a cup without a word, which she'd learned was Marco's version of acknowledgement. She took it. "Is he ready?" she asked. "He's been ready since 6, Marco said. "Are you?" Marco looked at her. "I'm never ready for federal meetings. I've learned to proceed anyway." Emma almost smiled. "That might be the most honest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it," Marco said. But the edges of it were different than they'd been 3 days ago. Adrian came down at 7:40. He was dressed with that same particular authority that was less about clothes and more about how he occupied space. But Emma saw something different in it this morning. Something that had been settled. Whatever had happened between the library and this morning had landed somewhere in him and taken a position. He looked at Emma across the kitchen. "You don't have to come," he said. "I know," Emma said. "I'm coming." Marco opened his mouth. "Marco," Adrian said quietly. Marco closed it. Agent Paul Reyes was not what Emma had expected. She'd built a mental image from Dana's description and the general cultural vocabulary around federal agents, something official managed with the specific professional distance of law enforcement. What she found instead was a man in his early 50s with tired eyes and the look of someone who had been working the same case for long enough that he'd developed complicated feelings about it. He looked at Emma when they came in. His eyes moved to Adrian, then back to Emma. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I want to say for the record that you're here voluntarily." "I'm here voluntarily," Emma confirmed. "And you understand that anything said in this conversation—" "Agent Reyes." Emma said, "I'm a grant writer. I understand exactly what voluntary cooperation with federal agents means, and I'm choosing it. Let's move forward." Reyes looked at her for a moment, then at Adrian, then back at her. "She found the Rinaldi angle," Adrian said. Reyes looked at Emma again with an expression that recalibrated something. "Tell me," he said. Emma told him. She laid it out the way she'd laid it out to Adrian, methodically, without decoration, following the logic from Benedetti's unauthorized visit to the phone call, to the information flow, to the conclusion. She used the vocabulary of someone who understood systems without being fluent in criminal ones. She filled in the gaps with questions when she didn't know, and Reyes filled those gaps. And by the time they were 40 minutes into the conversation, the three of them were operating not as federal agent and subject and civilian, but as three people who had pieces of a puzzle and were assembling it together. Reyes had known Benedetti was moving independently. He hadn't known about Rinaldi's role as a double channel. That piece, Emma's piece, opened a section of the investigation that had been closed. Adrian gave him the structure of the communication channels, the intermediaries, the logistics that Reyes had been unable to trace because his informant had been selectively filtering. By 10:15, Reyes sat back in his chair. "You understand what you've given me," he said to Adrian, not as a threat, as a statement. "I understand what it means for Benedetti," Adrian said, "and for you. We can have that conversation separately." Adrian's voice was even. "The cooperative frame you mentioned last night, I'd like to know what that actually entails." "It entails that the current investigation is about Benedetti and the faction he's been running independent of the Maranzano Don," Reyes said carefully. "It does not currently involve your operations. Whether that continues to be true is a longer conversation," Adrian said. "A longer conversation," Reyes agreed. They looked at each other across the table. Two men who had been on opposite sides of something for a long time, seeing each other clearly for what might have been the first time. "One more thing," Reyes said. He looked at Emma. "Ms. Carter, in the photographs taken by Kresh at the Meridian Gala, the ones that started this, you had no prior connection to Dante Maranzano. Is that accurate?" "I'd never heard his name before Adrian mentioned it," Emma said. "And your presence near him in the photographs was coincidental." "I was walking toward the balcony," Emma said. "He was standing in the direction of the balcony. That's the entirety of our connection." Reyes nodded slowly. "And your connection to Mr. Valenti at the time of the gala?" "We had met approximately 4 minutes before the photograph was taken," Emma said. "We did not meet again until the following morning." Reyes looked between them. "All right," he said. He gathered the papers in front of him. "I'm going to ask you both to remain available, not confined available." He looked at Emma specifically. "Ms. Carter, this may require a formal statement in the next 72 hours. "I'll be there," Emma said. Reyes stood. He offered his hand to Adrian, which was the last thing Emma expected. Adrian looked at it for a half second that contained a significant amount of history, and then shook it. "Valenti," Reyes said, "for whatever it's worth, what you walked in here with today required something." "It required someone to point out that it was the correct move," Adrian said. He didn't look at Emma when he said it, but she felt it anyway. "Chalmir." They didn't speak in the car on the way back. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much and none of it had obvious words attached to it yet, and both of them had learned enough about each other to know that filling silence with inadequate language was worse than the silence itself. Emma watched the city pass. Adrian watched the road. Marco drove with the specific focus of a man who was giving them the illusion of privacy, while missing nothing. It was Emma who broke it. "Benedetti's going to know," she said. "When Reyes moves on, Rinaldi Benedetti will know that the channel was compromised. He'll know it came from us." "Yes," Adrian said. "How much time does that give us?" "Before he acts on it." Adrian looked at her. 72 hours, maybe less." "So the federal meeting was the first move," Emma said, "not the resolution." "It was never going to be the resolution," Adrian said. "It was the piece that changed the game. The resolution is different." Emma turned to look at him. "How different?" He met her gaze. "The kind of different," he said quietly, "that I can't ask you to be part of." Emma looked at him for a long moment. "Adrian," she said carefully, "you pulled me out of my life and put me into yours. You made me a pressure point in someone else's strategy. You sat across from me in a library and told me the truth about your brother and your father and a scholarship and 15 years of mathematics you've been trying to make add up." She paused. At what point did you decide you got to make that determination unilaterally? He said nothing. What happens next? She asked. All of it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Benedetti has one move left, and it requires getting to you before the federal case closes around him. He said it with the flat precision of something he'd been calculating since they left Reyes's office. Which means the next 72 hours are not about the case anymore. They're about you. Emma processed this. He's going to make a move on me directly. He's going to try to use you as a negotiating position with me, not with Reyes, not with the Maranzano Don. Adrian's voice was controlled. With me specifically, because he's figured out that I'm the variable that changes my behavior. He knows you care what happens to me, Emma said quietly. Yes. And does he know why? The question landed. Adrian looked at her. The full, complete, unguarded look that he had given her maybe 3 times in the 4.5 days they'd known each other. The look that came out from behind the controlled surface and meant something actual. No, he said, because I didn't know why until very recently myself. Emma held his gaze. Marco in the front seat found something very specific to look at on the road ahead. All right, Emma said. Her voice was steady. Then let's figure out what we're doing about the next 72 hours. Emma, I am not a passive pressure point, she said. We established that, so tell me the plan. She turned back to the window. All of it, starting now. Adrian looked at her profile for a long moment. The line of her jaw, the particular set of her shoulders that meant she was deciding, not asking. He had spent 15 years in a world that measured people by what they were willing to do when everything was at stake. Emma Carter. Grant writer restaurant hostess woman who had spent her life trying to be invisible had sat in front of a federal agent and taken apart a criminal conspiracy using a phone call and 20 minutes of clear thinking. And now she was asking him without drama and without flinching to tell her everything. He started talking. Outside the car, Chicago moved around them, its noise and its ambition, and its complicated layered history of power and consequence. And inside it, 2 people who had found each other in the worst possible set of circumstances did what people do when the circumstances stop mattering more than the finding. They planned. Together. And 72 hours was either enough time or it wasn't. But neither of them was facing it alone. The plan had 3 parts, and Emma memorized all of them on the drive back. The first part was controlled visibility. Instead of hiding Emma deeper inside the estate, which Benedetti would interpret as confirmation that she was valuable, and Adrian was afraid they would allow a specific managed trace of her presence to exist. Not her actual location. A ghost of her. Dana would send a text from Emma's phone to a contact Benedetti's people were monitoring casual and ordinary, suggesting Emma was at a friend's place in Wicker Park for a few days. Nothing dramatic, just the digital exhale of a woman who didn't know she was being watched. The second part was Marco. He would move through 3 of Adrian's communication channels over the next 18 hours, each one carrying a slightly different version of the same information that the Rinaldi situation had been discovered internally and was being handled without federal involvement. A deliberate misdirection. Benedetti would receive conflicting signals about how much Adrian actually knew, which would slow his response time while he tried to verify. The third part, Emma didn't love. "You're using yourself as bait," she said when Adrian laid it out in the library that afternoon. "I'm making myself available," Adrian said. "There's a difference." "There really isn't." Emma looked at him steadily. "You're going to let Benedetti believe he has a window, that you're distracted by the federal meeting, that your attention is divided, that this is the moment he can move. And when he moves, Reyes will have what he needs to close the case." Adrian's voice was level. "Benedetti acts, we document it, and the federal case against him is no longer circumstantial. And I'll be fine." "Adrian." Emma's voice was precise. "That is not an answer." He looked at her. "I've navigated worse than Benedetti." "You've navigated worse alone," she said. "This is different. He knows about me, which means his move is going to involve me somehow. You've said that. She crossed her arms. So don't tell me you'll be fine when the variable he's going to use is sitting in this room. The silence had weight. Marco, who was leaning against the wall with his coffee and his complicated face, said nothing, which meant he agreed with Emma and was choosing not to say so, which was its own form of commentary. What do you want me to tell you? Adrian asked. I want you to tell me what happens if Benedetti's move isn't what you're predicting, Emma said. What's the version where this goes wrong? Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down. The version where it goes wrong, he said, is if Benedetti doesn't move directly. If instead he goes to the Maranzano Don, who doesn't know about any of this yet, and frames the federal meeting as Adrian Valenti cooperating against the family. He paused. In that version, I'm not dealing with a rogue faction. I'm dealing with the entire organization. Emma absorbed this. How likely is that? Less likely than the direct move, Adrian said. Benedetti has spent 18 months building an independent power base precisely because he doesn't trust the Dawn. Going to the Dawn now means exposing that. He won't do it unless he's cornered. And if he feels cornered, then Marco's misdirection becomes more important. Adrian looked at his second. He needs to believe he still has room to maneuver. Marco nodded once. Emma looked between them. All right, she said. What do I do? You stay here, Adrian said. That's not an action, that's a position. Emma, if Benedetti's intelligence on you includes the fact that I've been working to resolve this rather than waiting to be rescued, she said, then my sitting in this house doing nothing is also a signal. It's the signal of someone being protected, which confirms I'm a pressure point. She held his gaze. But if I'm visible as an agent, as someone who went to Reyes voluntarily who is actively cooperating, then I'm not leverage anymore. I'm a complication. Marco set down his coffee cup. Adrian looked at her. You want to make yourself difficult to use, he said. I want to be accurate about what I actually am, Emma said. I'm not a hostage. I'm not a victim. I'm a woman who walked into this situation by accident and has been actively working to resolve it for 4 days. She paused. Let Benedetti's people see that. Let them report back to him that I'm not behaving like someone who can be picked up and leveraged. See what that does to his timeline. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Marco said without looking up from the floor, She's right. Adrian looked at his second. She's been right more often than not, Marco said flatly. I'm noting it for the record. Adrian looked at Emma. Fine, he said. But nothing without me knowing about it first. Agreed, Emma said. And nothing without me knowing about it first. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. Agreed, he said. Dad. The first 18 hours passed in the particular tension of waiting that Emma had not previously experienced, the tension of having set a trap and needing the prey to walk into it on their own schedule. She worked. She ate. She walked the grounds in the late afternoon cold, with her hands in her pockets, and her mind running through variables the way it ran through grant budgets, systematically looking for the number that didn't add up. The number that didn't add up was Marco. She found him at the back of the house at 7 in the evening. He was on his phone but ended the call when he saw her. The thing about Marco was that he ended calls when he saw her now, which was different from the first 2 days when he'd deliberately taken them in rooms she wasn't in. The channels, she said. The 3 misdirections you laid out. What about them? Who's carrying them? Marco looked at her. Associates I trust. How well do you trust them? Completely. Marco. Emma kept her voice even. Completely is a word that means something different in your world than in mine. Rinaldi was trusted. Rinaldi was completely. Something moved in Marco's expression. Not offense. The specific acknowledgement of someone who recognizes a valid point they don't want to validate. Different category of trust, he said. These are people I've known since before Adrian. How many of them knew about Rinaldi? A pause. Too long. One of them, Marco said carefully. Peripherally. Emma looked at him. Which channel does he carry? She asked. The second one. And the second channel tells Benedetti what exactly? That the federal meeting was about a separate matter. Not about Rinaldi. Not about Benedetti. Emma thought about this. So if your associate is compromised, if Benedetti has a line to him the way he had a line to Rinaldi, then the second channel isn't misdirection. It's confirmation. It tells Benedetti that the meeting was about something unrelated, which gives him his window. Marco went very still. You're saying I might have handed him the information that accelerates his timeline, Marco said. I'm saying it's possible. Emma watched him. How long since you sent it? 4 hours. Emma turned toward the house. We need to tell Adrian right now. Emma. Marco caught up with her in 2 steps. If I'm wrong about this, I've just told Adrian that my judgment on his people is compromised. That's Marco. She stopped and faced him. If you're right about this, we have less time than we thought. The cost of being wrong about that is lower than the cost of not knowing. She held his gaze. You know that. You're just afraid he'll lose confidence in you. Marco looked at her. Tell him, Emma said quietly. He won't lose confidence in you. He'll lose confidence in you if you don't. Adrian's reaction was not what Emma had braced for. He listened. He asked 2 questions, both precise, both aimed at verifying the specific nature of the associate's connection to Rinaldi rather than at Marco's judgment. Then he made 3 phone calls in rapid succession, while Emma and Marco stood in the study and waited. The third call lasted 40 seconds. When he ended it, his face had changed. Benedetti received the second channel, Adrian said. My contact confirmed the message moved through within the hour of Marco sending it. He looked at Marco. The associate is Benedetti's. Marco said something quiet in Italian that Emma didn't catch. How many of our other channels has he had access to? Adrian asked. The second is the only one he carried, Marco said. His voice was controlled in the specific way of a man holding himself accountable without collapsing under it. Everything else is clean. All right. Adrian looked at his phone, then at Marco. You caught it. That's what matters. Marco looked at him. Adrian, you brought it to me before it caused damage we couldn't manage, Adrian said. We recalibrate. Benedetti thinks he has a window. We let him think that, and we control what he walks into. He set the phone down. But his timeline just accelerated. He'll move in the next 12 to 24 hours, not 72. Emma heard the recalculation in his voice and matched it. Then we don't have time for the ghost trail in Wicker Park. He already knows I'm not there. He knows you're associated with me, Adrian said. He doesn't know where you are. But he'll guess the estate, Emma said. He'll guess the estate, Adrian agreed. Which means we either move you, or we make the estate the controlled environment where we want him to come. The room went quiet. Emma understood the logic before he said it. She also understood what it required. If you move me, you split your attention, she said. You're managing 2 locations, and Benedetti knows that. She looked at Adrian. If you keep me here, the estate becomes the ground you control. Yes. And Benedetti coming here is what Reyes needs to close the case. Yes. So you need me to be here, Emma said. As the reason he comes. Emma, I'm not asking you to need it, she said. I'm telling you the logic. It's correct. I can see it. She looked at him directly. And I'm telling you, I'm not afraid to be here. I trust the estate. I trust Marco. And I trust you. A pause. But I need you to trust me back. If something happens and I need to act, I need to know you're not going to try to manage me into a room somewhere. Adrian looked at her for a very long moment. What kind of acting? He asked. The kind that protects both of us, Emma said. I'm not asking to be in the middle of whatever Benedetti sends. I'm asking to not be a problem you're solving in one room while the real problem is in another. The silence stretched. "All right," Adrian said. "You stay visible. You stay in the main areas of the house. If anything changes, you go to the East Wing with Mrs. Callahan, not because I'm managing you, but because Mrs. Callahan has a gun and knows how to use it, and the East Wing has 2 exits." He held her gaze. "That's the trade." Emma looked at him. "Mrs. Callahan has a gun." "Since 1987, Adrian said. Emma processed this. "All right," she said. "That's the trade." They ate dinner together, all 4 of them, Adrian and Emma and Marco and Mrs. Callahan, in the kitchen at the long wooden table, and it was nothing like the tense, strategic war room Emma might have expected. Mrs. Callahan had made pasta. Marco refilled everyone's water without being asked. Adrian talked briefly and without drama about the specifics of the next 12 hours. Then Mrs. Callahan said completely calmly, "The pasta will be better than whatever Benedetti has planned." And Marco almost smiled, and Emma felt something strange move through her chest. It felt for a moment exactly like belonging. The feeling frightened her more than Benedetti did. After dinner, when Marco and Mrs. Callahan had moved to other parts of the house, Emma helped Adrian clear the table. Not because she was asked, because it was something ordinary to do with her hands. "You're quiet," Adrian said. "I'm thinking." "About Benedetti. About the pasta comment," Emma said. She handed him a bowl to dry. "The way the 4 of us just sat there." She paused. "This is your real life, isn't it? Not the gala, not the federal meetings. This." Adrian looked at the bowl in his hands. "Mrs. Callahan has been feeding me since I was 22, he said. "Marco has eaten at this table more times than I can count." A pause. "I don't know that I've thought about it as a life exactly. It's just what was here. That's what a life is," Emma said. "The things that are just there." He looked at her. "What's just there for you?" he asked. "Your actual life." Emma thought about it honestly. "Sunday calls with my mother. The specific corner table at the restaurant where I like to do paperwork between shifts. Dana talking too fast when she's excited about something. The beagle that lives downstairs from me." She paused. "It doesn't sound like much when you list it." "It sounds exactly like enough," Adrian said. She looked at him. "I've been in rooms that cost $100,000, he said, "with people who had everything those rooms imply, and I have never once felt what I feel at this table." He set the dried bowl down. "So don't apologize for your corner table." Emma was quiet for a moment. "What do you feel at this table?" she asked. He looked at her with the full, unguarded expression she'd now catalogued carefully in her memory. "Safe," he said simply. The word landed in the kitchen and stayed there. Emma turned back to the dishes. "Adrian," she said carefully after a moment. "Yes. When this is over, when Benedetti is handled and Reyes has what he needs, and I can go back to my apartment." She paused. "What happens?" The silence that followed was different from the others. It had a texture, a specific quality of a question that has been running under both of them for days, finally spoken aloud. "I don't know," Adrian said. It came out honestly, without the controlled precision he used for most things. Raw, almost. "I've been trying not to think about that particular question because the answer involves variables I don't know how to calculate." "Like what?" "Like whether you'd want anything to do with someone whose world just upended your life for the better part of 2 weeks. He didn't look at her. "Like whether what happens between people in extreme circumstances means the same thing when the circumstances are gone." A pause. "Like whether a woman who spent her entire life making herself invisible would want to be visible to someone who everyone in his city knows." Emma turned to look at him. "Those are real questions," she said. "Yes. I don't have answers to all of them right now," Emma said. "I know. But I have an answer to the last one." She held his gaze. "I spent my life being invisible because I thought that was the only version of safe. I'm reconsidering that." A pause. "Being visible to you doesn't feel the way I thought it would." "How does it feel?" Emma looked at him steadily. "Like something I was doing anyway without meaning to." She turned back to the sink. So the question about extreme circumstances is probably the one that matters, whether this is real or whether it's just intensity. And I don't know yet, Emma said honestly. But I'm not dismissing it. She handed him the last bowl. That's what I can tell you right now. He took the bowl. His hand briefly touched hers. Not an accident, not a gesture, just a moment of contact that said something neither of them had found the full vocabulary for yet. That's enough, he said quietly. Benedetti moved at 2:47 in the morning. Emma was awake. She'd been unable to sleep past 2, some animal part of her nervous system that had been calibrating threat levels for days, had decided that tonight was different, and she'd lain in the dark for 45 minutes before giving up and sitting by the window with the Steinbeck novel she was never actually going to finish. She heard the alarm first. Not a loud alarm. A soft, specific pulse from somewhere in the house that she recognized as the perimeter signal Adrian had shown her that afternoon. Then footsteps in the hall. Then Marco's voice low and rapid. She put down the book. She went to the door. Marco was in the hallway. He looked at her, and something in his expression recalibrated when he saw she was already dressed and already moving. "East Wing," he said. "Mrs. Callahan." "How many?" Emma asked. "4 vehicles. Perimeter breach on the north side." His voice was completely level. "Adrian is—" "Where is Adrian?" "Main hall. He has people, Emma." "I'm going," she said. "I'm going right now." She started down the hall toward the east wing. Then she stopped. "Marco?" She turned. "Is he—" "He's fine," Marco said. "He was prepared for this." "But you weren't prepared for 4 vehicles," Emma said. "Were you?" Marco's jaw tightened slightly. "Go," he said. "Please." Emma went. Adieu. Mrs. Callahan was already in the East Wing sitting room when Emma arrived, and the gun Marco had mentioned was resting on the table beside her tea, with the matter-of-fact placement of someone who had integrated it into their domestic landscape decades ago. "Sit down," Mrs. Callahan said. "Tea's on." Emma sat. She didn't want tea. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. 4 vehicles, Emma said. "I heard." Mrs. Callahan poured. Adrian built this house with exactly this possibility in mind. The north side has 3 choke points. Those 4 vehicles aren't going to have an easy approach. But 4 is more than expected. Yes. Mrs. Callahan handed her the tea. "Benedetti is scared. Scared men use more than they need." She sat across from Emma with the composure of someone who had been through worse. Scared men also make mistakes. Emma wrapped her hands around the cup. "You've seen this before." "Once," Mrs. Callahan said simply. 12 years ago. Different situation, different people." She looked at Emma. "Adrian handled it." "And you stayed." "Where would I go?" Mrs. Callahan said. Not dramatically, just as fact. Emma listened. She heard voices from the direction of the main hall. Adrian's giving instructions with the clipped precision she'd heard from him only once before, the morning she'd found out about her mother's address. Then, sounds she chose not to identify specifically. Then quiet. A different kind of quiet than before. Her phone buzzed. Adrian East Wing. Stay. Emma looked at the message. Then she typed back, "Status. 3 seconds. Adrian contained. Reyes is on his way. Stay with Mrs. C." Emma stared at the word contained. She turned it over. She trusted it and didn't trust it in equal measure, because contained was a word that described a state, but not a cost. She typed, "Are you hurt?" The pause before his response was 11 seconds. She counted. Adrian. Nombre Emma Marco. Adrian fine. Everyone is fine. Stay put. She put the phone down. She picked up the tea. She drank it. Mrs. Callahan watched her. "You're not going to run in there," Mrs. Callahan said. "It was not a question." "He told me to stay." Emma said. That's not why you're staying. Emma looked at her. You're staying because you understand the plan, Mrs. Callahan said, and because you trust that contained means what he says it means. She paused. That's a significant thing. Trusting someone's word, trusting that word from that man. Mrs. Callahan said simply, in my experience, that takes most people considerably longer than 4.5 days. Emma was quiet. Mrs. Callahan, she said. When you said he's never brought anyone here before, not like this. Emma looked at her. What did you mean by like this? Mrs. Callahan was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that weighs honesty against discretion and makes a decision. He's brought people here for protection before, she said. Associates, family members of associates, people in complicated situations who needed a safe location. She set down her cup. He has never personally ensured that someone understood the situation completely. He has never sat in that library until midnight talking about his father. He has never made an agreement to tell someone everything. She looked at Emma steadily. He has never looked at someone the way he looks at you. Emma looked at the wall. Don't tell him I said that, Mrs. Callahan said with the serenity of someone who knows perfectly well that what they've said was correct and needed saying. He'll be insufferable about it. Emma almost laughed. I won't. Reyes arrived at 3:40 in the morning. Emma heard the federal vehicles on the drive, a different sound from Benedetti's approach, more organized, procedural, the sound of authority with paperwork. She stayed in the East Wing until Marco came to get her. It's done, he said from the doorway. Emma stood. Benedetti, she asked. In federal custody, 2 of his people as well. Marco's voice was flat, but carried something under it she'd learned to recognize as relief. The other 2 are in the hands of our people pending other arrangements. And Rinaldi. Reyes picked him up an hour ago, separately. Marco paused. The second channel associate, also in federal custody. Emma nodded. Marco, she said. You identified it. The second channel. That's what gave us the timing. Marco looked at her. You identified it, he said. I confirmed it. We identified it, Emma said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then, something in his face shifted not into warmth exactly, but into a different form of respect, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. He's in the main hall, Marco said. With Reyes. Emma went. Adrian was standing near the main hall's entrance when she came through, talking to Reyes in the low, controlled tones of a conversation that was winding down rather than escalating. He looked up when Emma appeared. The look he gave her was not the controlled neutral. It was not the managed distance. It was the specific look of a man who had spent the last hour managing a crisis and is now looking at the thing that made him want to manage it well, not for strategy, not for calculation, but because it mattered. Reyes looked between them. Ms. Carter, he said, I'll need that formal statement, today, if possible. Today is fine, Emma said. Reyes nodded. He said something to Adrian she didn't catch, and Adrian shook his hand again, and Reyes moved toward the door with his team. The house, which had been full of a specific tight energy for the past hour, began exhaling. Emma crossed the room. Adrian looked at her. You stayed, he said. You told me to. That hasn't always been sufficient. You said East Wing Mrs. Callahan, and you kept me informed, Emma said. That's different from being managed into a room. She looked at him carefully. You're not hurt. I'm not hurt. You're sure. Emma. The way he said her name, just her name, nothing attached to it, carried more information than most sentences she'd heard in the past week. I was scared, she said, plainly, without softening it. Not for myself, for you. He looked at her. That's... He stopped. I know, Emma said. It's a problem, in terms of the variables you couldn't calculate. She looked at him steadily. I'm noting it for the record. The corner of his mouth moved. Noted, he said. They stood in the main hall of the estate at 4 in the morning, with the residue of Benedetti's failed play still in the air, and Reyes's vehicles pulling out of the drive, and the particular silence of something that has been survived but not yet processed. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "Now Reyes has Benedetti Rinaldi and the second channel," Adrian said. "The Maranzano investigation closes around Benedetti specifically. The Dawn is insulated, which is what Reyes wanted. The independent faction is dismantled." A pause. "Your name is clean. Completely. Reyes will confirm it in writing." "And you?" Emma asked. "The cooperative frame," Adrian said. The longer conversation Reyes mentioned. A pause. "It involves significant changes to the structure of what I run, legally formally with federal oversight on the transition." Emma absorbed this. "That's what you've been working toward anyway." "Accelerated," he said. "And now it has a federal partner whether I wanted one or not. Is that the worst thing?" Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him. "Adrian?" "Yes." "I'm going to give Reyes my statement today," she said. "And then I'm going to go home, because I have jobs and rent and a Sunday call I'm already late for, and my mother is going to need a significant amount of creative explanation." She paused. "I need to go back to my actual life and see what it looks like from inside it instead of from 60 miles away." He nodded. "I know." "But I want you to know something before I go," Emma said. He waited. "What you said last night," she said, "about not knowing what happens next, about the variables you couldn't calculate." She held his gaze with the complete, unguarded directness she brought to everything that mattered. The one about whether what happens in extreme circumstances means the same thing when the circumstances are gone. A pause. "I think you know the answer to that one. I think you've known for a few days." Adrian looked at her. "Yes," he said. "I do." "So do I," Emma said. The morning was beginning outside the specific gray-blue of dawn, arriving not dramatically, but persistently, the way real things always do. Mrs. Callahan was already in the kitchen. Marco was somewhere in the house doing what Marco always did after a crisis, which was ensure that everything was accounted for. Emma Carter, who had spent 34 years perfecting the art of invisibility, stood in the home of the most dangerous man she had ever met and felt clearly, unmistakably, with a certainty she hadn't expected to find here completely, entirely, terrifyingly seen. "I need to sleep for about 4 hours," she said. "There's a room upstairs," Adrian said. "I know where it is," Emma said. She turned toward the stairs. Then she stopped. "Adrian." "Yes." "When you come to give that formal statement to Reyes," she said, "and when that longer conversation starts, and when all of this begins to look like something different than it looked like a week ago." She paused. "Come find me." He held her gaze across the hallway. "I will," he said. She went upstairs, and Adrian Valenti, who had spent 15 years building walls that served excellent strategic purposes, stood at the bottom of a staircase in his own house and felt every one of them recalibrate fundamentally and permanently around a center they hadn't previously included. There was something terrifying about that. There was something else about it too. Something that felt for the first time in longer than he could calculate exactly like the right direction. She gave the formal statement to Reyes at 11:30 that morning in a federal building downtown with a government-assigned attorney sitting beside her who had nothing to do because Emma's account was organized precise and required no management. Reyes listened. He asked 17 questions. Emma answered all of them directly, without hesitation, without the performance of someone trying to protect themselves, because there was nothing to protect. She was who she had always been, a grant writer and a restaurant hostess who wore the wrong dress to a charity gala, and ended up inside a situation that had nothing to do with her until it had everything to do with her. When it was over, Reyes walked her to the elevator. "Ms. Carter," he said, For the record, and this is not something I say often in this context, you handled yourself with significant composure throughout this. Emma looked at him. I was scared the entire time. I know, Reyes said. That's what I mean. The elevator doors opened. Emma stepped in. Reyes, she said before they closed. Valenti. The longer conversation you mentioned the federal oversight on the transition. Is he going to be all right? Reyes looked at her for a moment. The professional neutrality on his face did something careful. He gave us more than he had to, Reyes said. That means something in how those conversations go. A pause. I can't make you promises, but the direction is right. The doors closed. Emma stood in the elevator and felt the past 6 days settle through her, like something that had been held suspended and had finally been allowed to land. The weight of it, the strangeness of it, the absolute improbability of 2 weeks ago if you'd tried to describe it to the Emma Carter who drove 40 minutes in heels to a charity gala because her best friend told her she needed an adventure. She walked out of the federal building into the cold November air and stood on the sidewalk. Then she called her mother. Her mother's name was June Carter, and she had been managing her daughter's emotional deflection since Emma was approximately 11 years old, which meant she heard through the carefully organized narrative of, I was helping a friend with a difficult situation, to the part underneath it in about 90 seconds. Emma Louise Carter, her mother said, you sound different. I'm fine, Mom. Different isn't the same as not fine. A pause. Different is, did something happen to you, or did something happen in you? Emma stood on the sidewalk outside the federal building in downtown Chicago. Both, she said. I think both. Her mother was quiet for a moment. June Carter's silences were not empty. They were full of the specific kind of listening that came from decades of paying close attention to someone she loved. Are you safe? Her mother asked. Yes, completely. Are you happy? Emma opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. I don't know yet, she said. I think I might be moving toward it. Her mother made a sound Emma had been hearing since childhood, the specific soft exhale of a woman receiving information she's been waiting for longer than the person delivering it realized. Come for dinner Sunday, her mother said, and bring the whole story. Parts of it are complicated. Emma, I raised you alone on a school teacher's salary in a 2-bedroom apartment. Her mother's voice was warm and completely firm. Bring the whole story. Emma almost laughed. Sunday, she said. She ended the call. She stood on the sidewalk for 1 more minute, breathing the cold air before she hailed a cab and went home. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it. That was the first thing she noticed, the absolute faithful ordinariness of it. The mail had accumulated by the door. The refrigerator had made its decision about the yogurt she'd left in it. The beagle downstairs was apparently having a feeling about something audible through the floor. Everything exactly precisely stubbornly as it had always been. The dress was still over the chair. Emma stood in the middle of her living room and looked at it. Black silk draped exactly where she'd left it after the Meridian Gala on the night that she had come home, telling herself it was just one evening, just an adventure Dana had talked her into, just a strange and arrogant man with a warning she didn't understand. She picked it up. She smoothed it with both hands. She hung it properly in the closet on a hanger with the care of something that had become significant without asking permission to. Then she sat on her couch. Then she lay down. Then she slept for 9 hours straight, which was the first real sleep she'd had in 6 days, and she did not dream about anything she could name, only the specific formless warmth of someone who is back where they started, and knows with new certainty that where they started is not where they'll remain. Dana arrived at 8 the next morning with coffee and the expression of a woman who has been exercising monumental restraint for a week and is officially done with that exercise. Sit down, Emma said when she opened the door. I'll tell you everything. You'd better, Dana said, because I have been worried sick and also absolutely furious and also weirdly proud of you, and I've been cycling through all 3 for 6 days. Emma sat. She told her. All of it. Benedetti Rinaldi, the library, the federal meeting, the night Benedetti's people came to the estate Reyes, the statement. She told it the way she told Adrian everything directly, without softening the parts that were frightening or prettying up the parts that were complicated. Dana listened without interrupting, which was how Emma knew she was genuinely gripped, rather than performing attentiveness. When Emma finished, Dana was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "You fell for him," she said. "I didn't say that." "Emma, you described the man's relationship with his housekeeper and his brother and the deliveries he sends 3 times a week to his old neighborhood. You told me he said the word safe about eating at his own kitchen table." Dana looked at her with the serene certainty of 22 years of friendship. "You fell for him." Emma looked at her coffee cup. "It's complicated. Everything real is complicated." Dana tucked her feet under her. "What did he say before you left?" "He said he'd come find me." When the federal process gets to a certain point, when things look different than they looked a week ago." Emma paused. "He said he'd come find me." "And do you believe him?" Emma looked at her best friend. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." Dana absorbed this. Her expression moved through several things. "Emma Carter," she said finally, "I told you that dress would give you an adventure." Emma looked at her. "Don't," Emma said. Dana, I'm just noting." "I know what you're noting." Emma almost smiled. "Don't." Dana smiled into her coffee. "I'm just saying." The first week back was the most disorienting Emma had experienced in years. Not because anything was wrong, because everything was right, and right felt foreign. She went back to both jobs. She finished the grant reports that had been waiting. She sat at her corner table in the restaurant between shifts and did her paperwork, and watched people come and go and felt the strange double vision of someone who has seen the inside of a world most people don't know exists and then returned to the ordinary one. She didn't hear from Adrian. She hadn't expected to, not immediately. The federal process was not fast, and the longer conversation with Reyes was by definition long. She understood this intellectually. She understood the structure and the timeline and the reason. She still checked her phone more than she would have admitted to anyone except Dana, who already knew. On the 8th day back, Marco called. Emma was so surprised to see his name on her phone that she almost dropped it. "Marco," she said. "Ms. Carter." His voice had the same controlled economy it always did. "I'm calling to tell you that the first phase of the federal conversation concluded yesterday. Adrian asked me to let you know." Emma sat down. "And? No charges. Formal agreement on the transition structure. Federal oversight for 36 months and then a clean separation if the conditions are met." A pause. "It's the best possible outcome." Emma felt something release in her chest that she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "He's okay," she said. "He is," Marco said. Then, in a slightly different register, "Ms. Carter, he was going to call you himself." "What stopped him?" A pause. "I think he's trying to give you time to return to your life, before he complicates it again." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Marco," she said, "tell him he's already done what he came to do." A pause. "I'm not sure I understand what that means." "He will," Emma said. "Tell him exactly that." She heard Marco process this with the particular quality of a man who has watched something develop over 6 days and is now watching it continue. "All right," he said. He ended the call. Emma sat with her phone in her hand. She looked at the wall of her apartment. She thought about what she'd said. She thought about the fact that she meant it, that it was accurate, not romantic, not overstatement. Adrian had said he'd come find her, and she'd believed him, and she still believed him. But what Marco had just described was not a man executing a plan. It was a man who had returned her to her life and was standing at the edge of it, unsure whether entering it again was something she actually wanted or something she'd said in the specific heightened gravity of a situation that no longer existed. He was wrong about that. She was going to tell him so. She called Dana. I need you to cover my Thursday afternoon shift, she said. Why? Because I have somewhere to be. A pause. Emma Carter, are you? Goodbye, Dana. Emma. She ended the call. She went to her closet. She took out the black silk dress. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she hung it back up because that dress belonged to a specific night and a specific version of things, and what she was going to do on Thursday afternoon did not require it. What she was going to do on Thursday afternoon was something else entirely. She called a number she'd kept in her phone since the estate. It rang 3 times. Emma, Adrian said. His voice was careful and warm and surprised and all of those things at once. I talked to Marco, she said. A pause. I know. He told me what you said. And a longer pause. I'm trying to determine what you meant. You already know what I meant, Emma said. You're a man who doesn't misread people. I don't want to misread this particular person, he said. The stakes are different. Emma sat on the edge of her bed. Adrian, you told me you'd come find me. I know. I'm telling you that I'd like you to do that. Emma. His voice was careful, precise, everything she'd learned to recognize as Adrian meaning something rather than saying something. Going back to your life, I want you to have had enough time to... I've been back for 9 days, Emma said. I've gone to both my jobs, and I've eaten at my corner table, and I've called my mother, and I've done every ordinary thing I do. And none of them feel the way they used to feel. A pause. Not because they're less. Because I'm different in them. She let that settle. You asked me what was just there in my life. I told you about the corner table, and the Sunday calls, and the beagle downstairs. She paused. Something else is just there now. And it's been there since a library and a kitchen table, and a man who trusted me with the truth when he didn't have to. The silence on the line had a specific quality. Full. You're certain, Adrian said. I've been certain for 9 days, Emma said. I was waiting for the right moment to stop being polite about it. Something happened in his voice. The controlled evenness shifted, just slightly, just enough. Thursday, he said. I'm free Thursday afternoon. There's a restaurant on Elm Street, he said. Not the kind you usually go to, but you'll like it. How do you know what kind I usually go to? Emma, he said. I know your schedule. She laughed, genuine and surprised the way she'd laughed in a ballroom when she'd thought he was being arrogant. Except this time, she knew the full weight of who she was laughing with, and it only made the laugh more real. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he said. She ended the call. She sat in her apartment with her phone in her hand and her heart doing the embarrassing thing it had been doing since a specific evening in November, and she let it. Thursday arrived the way important things do, preceded by 2 ordinary days that felt like the held breath before a word. Emma got to the restaurant 7 minutes early. She was shown to a corner table, which she noted with the specific amusement of someone whose life had started providing callbacks. The restaurant was quiet for a Thursday afternoon. Good food, she could tell by the smell of it. Not the kind of place that announced itself. She was looking at the menu when the door opened. Adrian came in and crossed the room and sat down across from her without ceremony. The way he did everything as though the action had been decided and the execution was simply the honest completion of it. He looked at her. She looked at him. Outside the context of the estate, outside the crisis and the federal meetings and the 72-hour countdown, he was still exactly himself. The gray storm eyes. The intensity that had no performance in it. The face of a man who had survived his own story and was now sitting across from someone and choosing not to hide it. You look, he said, exactly the same. Were you expecting otherwise? I was expecting the difference between how people seem in extreme circumstances and how they seem in normal ones. He looked at her steadily. There isn't one. There usually is, Emma said. I know. He picked up the menu. Not with you. Emma looked at her own menu. How's Marco? Complicated as always. He said to tell you... Adrian paused. He said to tell you that the second channel was your call, and the record should reflect that. Emma looked up. That's the most generous thing he's ever said about me. It's the most generous thing he said about anyone in recent memory. Adrian set the menu down. He respects you. That's not a common thing with Marco. I respect him, Emma said. Even when he's wrong. Especially when he's wrong, Adrian said. He's not wrong often enough for it to be comfortable. Emma smiled. The waiter came. They ordered. The ordinary machinery of a lunch moved forward, and it was strange, and not strange at all, because Emma had learned something in the past 9 days of ordinary life that she was still working out how to name. She had learned that the person she'd become in 6 days at an estate 60 miles outside Chicago was not a version of herself invented by circumstance. It was the version that had always been there waiting for circumstances extreme enough to require it to appear. She had not gone back to herself. She had gone forward to herself. And the man across the table was the reason she knew the difference. The transition structure, Emma said after they'd been talking for 20 minutes about smaller things. His brother's recent project in Portland, her mother's Sunday dinner, the specific challenge of re-explaining a week's absence to a restaurant manager. The federal oversight, 36 months. Yes. That's a significant commitment. It is. He looked at her. It's also the fastest legitimate path to the structure I've been trying to build for years. A pause. Reyes called it a bridge. I think he meant it as a condition. I think it's accurate as both. How does it change what you do day to day? Significantly. He said it without deflection. The import operations come under formal review. 3 of the property holdings are in transition. The people who depend on those structures, Marco, the people on those blocks, everyone in between, they all navigate a significant period of uncertainty. Are they staying? Emma asked. Your people. Most of them, Adrian said. The ones who were always going to stay are staying. The ones who were there for reasons that don't survive the new structure, they're finding other arrangements. He looked at his water glass. That's not comfortable, but it's honest. You're doing the accounting, Emma said. He looked up. The math you talked about, she said. Whether the costs add up to something worth what they cost. She held his gaze. Does it? Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. For the first time, I think it does. Emma looked at him. Because of the federal agreement. Because of several things, he said. The federal agreement is one of them. She didn't push it. She didn't need to. Some things didn't require more words than they already had. They ate. They talked. 2 hours passed with the specific quality of time that has been long awaited, not slow, not fast, but dense, full of the exact texture of 2 people discovering what they are in the absence of the extraordinary. What they were, Emma decided somewhere in the second hour, was this compatible in the specific deep way that has nothing to do with similarity. Adrian was precise where Emma was intuitive. He calculated where she trusted her reading of a situation. He had spent 15 years building walls that served him, and she had spent 34 building a different kind of invisibility that served her, and both of them had arrived at this table having recently dismantled something. That was the thing they had in common. Not their worlds, not their histories. The dismantling. They walked after lunch. Not far, the blocks around the restaurant in the cold that had deepened since November began its serious work on Chicago. Emma's coat was warm enough. Adrian walked beside her with his hands in his pockets, and it was companionable in the specific way of people who have already sat with each other in silence and know they can. I want to ask you something, Adrian said. Ask. When you went back to your life the 9 days, was it what you wanted it to be? Emma thought about it honestly. It was what it always was, she said. Which is good. It's a good life. It's a life I built carefully, and it serves me, and I'm grateful for it. A pause. But you asked if it was what I wanted it to be. And the honest answer is that something was different about being inside it. Different how? Like knowing a room so well you've stopped seeing it, Emma said. And then something happens that makes you see it again. The room is the same. You're different. She looked at him sideways. You asked me once what was just there in my life. I told you the corner table and the beagle and the Sunday calls. A pause. What's just there in yours now? After everything? Adrian was quiet for a moment. The deliveries, he said. They don't stop because the structure is changing. I've made sure of that. A pause. The library. I've been in that room more in the past week than I have in months. Another pause. Daniel called. Apparently he's coming to Chicago in February. Some engineering conference. He said this carefully, the way people say things that are significant, but they haven't fully processed yet. I think I'm going to tell him. Emma stopped walking. Adrian stopped beside her. About what you did, Emma said. When you were 17? All of it. His voice was steady. What I did. Why. What it cost. He looked at her. I don't know what he's going to do with it. He's going to be a grown man in his 30s who discovers that his brother spent 15 years of his life making sure he had a different one, Emma said. He's going to be devastated and furious and grateful and completely unable to express all three at the same time. A pause. And then he's going to be your brother. Actually, your brother, not the version you've been protecting from a distance. Adrian looked at her. You say that like you know, he said. I say it like I understand what it means to have someone in your life who protected you in ways you didn't ask for, Emma said. My mother did the same. Different circumstances, same architecture. She held his gaze. It's devastating, and it's the most profound thing a person can do for another person. And it doesn't cancel out the cost, but it means something that nothing else means. She paused. Tell him. He looked at her for a long moment. Emma, he said. Yes. I don't know how to do this slowly. He said it carefully, precisely the way he said things that mattered. This, whatever this is, I've been trying to give you time and distance and the appropriate space for someone to return to their own life before I... He stopped. I'm not built for this kind of patience. Emma looked at him. You spent 15 years building something incrementally under impossible conditions. That was strategy, he said. This is different. Why? Because I could calculate the strategy. He held her gaze. I cannot calculate this. I don't have the instruments for it. A pause. You're the first person I've told that to in, I can't remember. Emma looked at him standing on a Chicago sidewalk in November, 15 years of walls and deliveries and library books and kitchen tables, and a brother in Portland who didn't know, and she felt the exact specific truth of what had been building since a ballroom, and a warning and a laugh. You don't need to calculate it, she said. That's the part you keep missing. Emma, Adrian. She looked at him directly. You walked into a gala and you saw someone who didn't know your name and laughed at you and walked away. And you decided that was the most significant thing that had happened to you in longer than you could remember. She paused. I walked into a gala, and a man I'd never met told me not to walk past him in a dress I wasn't even sure I should be wearing, and I thought he was arrogant and ridiculous, and I went home and stared at my ceiling and couldn't stop turning it over. She held his gaze. We've already done the calculating. We did it without meaning to. The answer is already there. He looked at her. What's the answer? He said. Not because he didn't know. The same reason people ask questions they already understand, because hearing it is different from knowing it. That this is real, Emma said. That it was real in the library and at the kitchen table and on the phone Thursday morning and right now on this sidewalk. She looked at him with the complete, unguarded honesty she brought to everything that mattered. That I am not a woman who does things because of extreme circumstances. I am a woman who spent 34 years being extremely careful about everything, and the most careful thing I have ever done is look at you clearly and decide that what I see is worth the complication. The sidewalk was quiet. Adrian looked at her. Something happened in his face, not slowly, not with the careful management she'd learned to read beneath. It happened the way real things happen all at once, without announcement, the particular release of a man who has been holding something at careful distance and has finally, irrevocably, let it arrive. He crossed the single step between them. He took her face in both hands, the same hands that had carried 15 years of complicated mathematics of deliveries and libraries, and a brother's scholarship, and a world built in the shadow of a father he'd refused to become. And he kissed her. Not tentatively, not carefully. The way you do something when you've already decided, and the deciding is over, and all that's left is the truth of it. Emma's hands found the front of his coat. She held on. Chicago moved around them in all its November noise, and cold and complicated history, and neither of them noticed any of it. When they pulled apart, Emma's forehead was against his. "I'm still a grant writer," she said. "I'm still a restaurant hostess. I still have a corner table and a Sunday call and a beagle I can hear through the floor." "I know," Adrian said. "And your world is still changing," he said, "significantly and formally and with federal documentation." A pause. "But changing." Emma pulled back enough to look at him. "This is not going to be simple." "No," he agreed. "We're going to have to figure out how two very different lives fit together without one of them swallowing the other." "Yes." "And you have 36 months of federal oversight and a transition structure that's going to require significant attention." "Yes." His hands were still framing her face. "Emma." "What?" "I'm aware of the complications." His voice was quiet and absolutely certain. "I have been calculating complications professionally for 15 years. I understand the structure of them." He looked at her. None of the complications changed the answer. Emma looked at him. "What's the answer?" she said. "The same reason. Adrian Valenti, who had built an empire on the precise management of what he allowed himself to want, who had spent a decade and a half deciding that certain things were not available to him, who had looked up at a window at 5:47 in the morning and seen the silhouette of a woman he'd known for one day and felt something reorganize in his chest that had not moved in years, looked at Emma Carter on a Chicago sidewalk and said the truest thing he had said to anyone in longer than either of them had been counting. "That you are the thing I came back from all of it for," he said. "Every piece of it. The rebuilding and the accounting and the federal bridge and the brother I'm going to call in February." He held her gaze. "All of it was going somewhere. I didn't know where until you laughed at me in a ballroom." Emma looked at him. The November wind moved between them. She thought about the dress back in her closet on its hanger. She thought about Dana's face when she'd come home. She thought about her mother saying, "Did something happen to you? Or did something happen in you?" Both, she had said. Both, she understood now, was exactly right. "Come to Sunday dinner," she said. He looked at her. "With your mother. She already knows most of the story." Emma straightened his coat collar, the small, certain gesture of a woman who has made a decision and is done deliberating about it. "She'll want to see the rest of it in person." Something moved across his face that she had no word for except this joy. Quiet, unpracticed, slightly uncertain in the way of something that hasn't been used in a very long time and is finding its shape again. "Sunday," he said. "Sunday." Emma confirmed. She took his hand. They walked, and Adrian Valenti, who had been described in federal documents as calculating and cold, who had grown up in a world that taught him love was a liability, who had spent 15 years paying a debt no one had issued him a receipt for, who had stood in a ballroom one November night and looked at a woman in a black silk dress and said 4 words that were not a flirtation and not a threat, but the most honest thing he knew how to offer, walked through his city beside the woman who had heard those words for what they actually were. Not a warning about a dress. A warning about what was coming. And Emma Carter, who had spent 34 years perfecting the art of being invisible, had walked straight into it anyway. Eyes open, hands steady, completely, and entirely herself. That was the thing neither of them had expected. That was the thing that made all the difference. That was the only thing in the end that had ever mattered.